Chapter 841. He gave a fake smile and then left. Once everyone was gone, Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief, her expression relaxing. She said, marrying Chi-Chi may be easier to capture. The system was incomparably virtuous and immediately said, there are still 2 substitute stickers left. They were left behind in the previous plane and were not used. Wei Wei Bai, don't tell her that it was a substitute sticker. Was it a substitute? That was just an out-of-body experience. What was the difference between this and MX? In any case, 2 days later, Wei Wei Bai was immediately stuffed onto a flower bridge. The wedding was very low-key. They all lived in the same home, so the flower bridge passed through 2 courtyards before landing. Madame Bai specially set aside a courtyard for Chi-Chi after all. She couldn't let him squeeze in with Wei Wei Bai in a dilapidated house. Wei Wei Bai came out of the sedan chair with a red veil over her head, and a pair of black boots appeared before her eyes. It was Chi-Chi. He reached out, seemingly gentle but in fact very forcefully grabbing her arm, not allowing her to escape as he dragged her in. After bowing to the heavens and the parents, the husband and wife finally bowed to each other. Wei Wei Bai was sent to the bridal chamber. The speed of this marriage could break the ancient world record. The wedding was very low-key, and they only invited their own family to a banquet. After all, everyone knew that this marriage was not a good thing. Madame Bai and the head of the Bai family sat in the main hall, unable to smile. Chi-Chi was gentle and courteous, toasting them one by one and finding no fault. This made the Bai family people reluctantly smile. After all, Chi-Chi didn't look that bad. Once everything was settled, the Bai family also left. Chi-Chi entered the room and saw a petite figure in a wedding dress sitting on the bed. The fiery red wedding dress was like a dazzling stream of flames, flowing down her body. She didn't notice that he had come, her white and slender fingers tightly gripping her handkerchief, twisting it nervously. From time to time, she would curse that damned Chi-Chi or stomp her feet, angrily saying, I won't let you off. Chi-Chimu stood at the door, his eyes deep as he stared for a long time before slowly walking over. He didn't pick up the wedding scale on the table. Instead, he directly reached out and lifted her red veil. The red cloth fluttered in the wind. It revealed her black, watery eyes, pink cheeks, and snow-white skin. Her red clothes completely accentuated her beautiful features. It was so gorgeous that it could not be suppressed. Chi-Chimu's dark eyes were dyed with a dazzling light. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. His voice was as hoarse as a knife. Wei Wei Bai, I told you. You went back on your words. I'm going to drag you to hell. His voice was filled with barely suppressed excitement. Wei Wei Bai's body trembled, but she immediately straightened up. She gritted her teeth and said, It's a fact that you tried to kill me, so why can't I go back on my words? Don't tell me that I have to keep a poisonous snake by my side. Chi-Chimu revealed a smile. The man was wearing a red groom's robe today. The neat red clothes made his slender body look as tall and straight as a pine tree. His face, in the bright candlelight, had a kind of treacherous evilness. His sharp eyes were dark and unfathomable. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed her arm, fiercely pushing her onto the bed. Wei Wei Bai fell onto the bed in fright. Chi-Chimu got onto the bed. His movements were extremely fast, pulling out the hairpin in her head and untying her hair. A head of fine black hair scattered over the bed, and the scent of orchids filled the air. Chi-Chimu took a deep breath, excitement appearing on his face. He chuckled softly and slowly leaned over, whispering in her ear, Do you know what hell is? Chapter 842. After Chi-Chimu and Wei Wei Bai got married, Madame Fu didn't guard against him. Although she still loathed him, at least it was for her daughter's sake. She didn't realize her previous plan of stopping him from going to the Imperial exam. And Wei Wei Bai also got what she wanted, receiving the side mission without any surprise. Ding, stop the male lead from taking the Imperial exam, can fail. But what was the suffix for fail? Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. Tongzi, is it to stop him from taking the exam? It's fine if he fails. System, then the reminder isn't that can fail, but that there is no punishment for failure. This follow-up is to say that you can fail, but you must make a move to stop it, and this move must not go easy on him. Only this way, even if you are exposed by the male lead, there will be no problem. At this point, the system also added, there is this kind of failure supplement because in the previous life, the Bai family stopped the male lead from taking the exam, but failed. So stopping the Imperial exam was necessary. Failure was also possible. Wei Wei Bai, can't go easy on him. Chi Chimu hasn't participated in the provincial exam yet. He started from the county-level exam and has to take the exam until next year to become the top scorer. I can't stop him every time. Although there were some changes to the time of the Imperial exam here. But what county-level scholar, or high scholar, they all had to pass one by one, and then next year was the court exam. The system calmly flipped through the data, then chewed on the instant noodle seasoning packet. Every time. Wei Wei Bai, so her 1.5 year of time was actually used to be a stumbling block for Chi Chimu. There was no time to be lazy. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai pondered the meaning of the main system. After thinking it over, she discovered that the main system was a Huang Shiren, an exploitative class, an evil devil. If there was a chance, she must tie it up and feed it to the dogs. The system gave 10,000 likes to the host's cute idea. Wei Wei Bai had just finished communicating with the system when the door opened. The embroidery bandage in her hand shook, and the needle pierced her finger, dripping blood. As soon as Chi Chimu entered, he saw his little cousin gripping the needle tightly, looking at him with both disgust and fear. When he saw the blood on her finger, his eyes darkened. How could you be so careless? Wei Wei Bai knew that her character had become a vicious woman who hated her cousin. It couldn't be helped. Chi Chimu liked this kind of thing. The more she hated him, the more he liked to torment her, and the faster her favorability rose. What the fuck was this perverted way of increasing favorability? Chi Chimu didn't put her attitude in his eyes at all. Wei Wei Bai was someone he could completely control, even when he was in such dire straits. She couldn't resist him. Under his plan, the rumors outside had already spread everywhere. She was defiled by robbers, and no one wanted her anymore. Even Madame Bai had given up on her. He no longer paid attention to her. His affection for her was so pretended that anyone would believe it. Everyone knew that she was willful and arrogant, but he had always been tolerant and protective of her. Therefore, no one would believe her even if she went out and cried that she had tortured her. Chi Chimu's dark schemes had all succeeded. He walked to her side and bent down to hold her bloody hand, but Wei Wei Bai dodged. She watched him warily, instinctively trembling at any intimate approach. This was a problem she had developed after being tormented by him during this period of time. She had suffered a big loss. She had used a dozen substitute stickers. A dozen In her eyes, Chi Chimu was now a monster that ate her life points. Chapter 843. Under the dim yellow light, her eyelashes cleverly covered those bright eyes filled with loathing for him. That beautiful, white, tender face carried an innocent feeling of ignorance. So bad that it really was stupid. Chi Chimu's fingers uncontrollably stroked her face. He had become the top scorer, so she could strut around everywhere. Wasn't she the most vain, the one who liked to flatter the strong and trample on the weak? Why didn't she understand that she could only trample on others when he stood high? his fingers gently and couldn't help but knead her face for a while before he got up and walked to the table. He fumbled around and took out the thing she had stuffed in. It was a cheat sheet. Chichimu looked at the sheet and couldn't help but shake his head. Even framing people is so straightforward. So stupid that it can't be cured. But there wasn't the slightest trace of anger in his words. Instead, there was some helplessness. After the examination, Chichimu calmly walked out of the examination hall. The questions were too simple, and he had figured out the examiner's preferences. Not a single accident happened. As he walked out of the examination hall, a carriage ran past him. The carriage was incomparably low-key, without any extravagance. But Chichimu saw at a glance that the insignia belonging to the imperial family was on the wood. It was the third prince's carriage. At this time, the third prince should have been pushed aside to the great imperial temple to pray for the emperor. In his previous life, he had appeared late and didn't have time to befriend the third prince when he was at his lowest. Later on, he had to take out that wealth and spend several years to gain the third prince's trust. And in this life, he planned to approach the third prince early on. The more down and out, the easier it was to approach. Chichimu thoroughly calculated the benefits in his heart and returned home. He found Weiwei sitting by the window holding a fruit, taking small bites. She didn't notice him, swaying her legs in satisfaction. Her skirt was like a flower, rippling with her movements. Heartless. Chichimu's face was cold, but his eyes couldn't help but soften. The usually cold room, with one more person, seemed a bit too crowded. It was as if her presence was everywhere. The calculations in Chichimu's heart had all disappeared, leaving only a pile of thoughts on how to torment her. When Weiwei heard the system prompt that Chichimu had returned, she calmly took a bite of the fruit. Just as she was about to swallow it, she found a warm chest pressed against her back. She almost choked herself to death. Was there such a reminder? He only spoke when he was already behind her. With the fruit in her mouth, she quickly adjusted her expression. Her eyes widened in surprise as she turned around to look at him. However, just as he turned around, he didn't even have time to put on a proper expression. He sealed her lips with a kiss. The sweet and juicy flesh in his mouth made him want to plunder it. His kisses had always been rough and aggressive. The tip of his tongue wrapped around her, stirring her flesh into pieces. As their breaths intertwined, Weiwei trembled violently. Chichimu's mouth was filled with the fragrance of the fruits she ate. Only when he was satiated did he release her. There was a hint of warmth in his gloomy and cold eyes. Weiwei's eyes were soaked with water, and the half-eaten fruit in her hand fell to the ground. Chichimu unhurriedly enjoyed her fear. He reached out to gently stroke her shiny black hair, his tone calm and gloomy. I was driven out of the examination hall. A hint of joy flashed through Weiwei's eyes. But Chichimu's next sentence made her unable to smile. I know it was you who stuffed the notes. Weiwei quickly refuted, no, it wasn't me. Chichimu looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. The handwriting is all yours, yet you're still quibbling. Plagiarists can never enter the examination hall. You made me lose the qualifications for the imperial examinations. Right now, I wish I could chew you up and swallow you into my stomach. As expected, Weiwei was scared. Her pink face lost color as she looked at him anxiously. Like a small animal that had been detained, she wished she could bury her head and hide. Chichimu hid his smile, his eyes deliberately becoming cold and ruthless. I have nothing now. It's better to kill you, stuff you into the well, and say you committed suicide. Weiwei was so anxious that she cried, don't kill me. During this time, Chichimu's ferocious appearance really made him seem like a murderer, causing this little pitiful girl to be tormented into a shadow. Chichimu still wanted to scare her. Suddenly, a kiss landed on his face. The kiss was filled with tears, sour and astringent, but unexpectedly wrapped in honey. She hugged his neck, tearfully kissing him. Chichimu's face was filled with shock, his mature viciousness disappearing. "Don't kill me." Wei Wei Bai looked like she had lost her head from anxiety, not knowing what she had done. Chichimu was dazed as she kissed him. His heartstrings trembled, and he didn't know why he became dizzy. He actually said something that shouldn't have been said. "Not killing you, I can't bear to." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 50. Chapter 844. After saying this, Chichimu's expression changed slightly, and he immediately changed his words. "After all, if you die like this, wouldn't it be letting you off too easily?" As expected, he saw Wei Wei Bai's expression freeze, and the kiss that fell on his face also slowed. Chichimu was dissatisfied and tugged at her arm. "Continue kissing. Kiss me more and I'll let you go." As expected, this sentence made her feel both annoyed and forbearing, and she continued to gently kiss his face. Chichimu sat quietly like this, letting her hang on his body. After a long time, his waist was actually a bit sore. The days of training were too short, and there was all kinds of torment in bed. His physical strength still hadn't reached his ideal standard. He had to train the strength of his arms and waist, or else it would be very strenuous to carry her the next time. He passed the county-level examination very easily. He got first place and became a scholar. Chichimu calculated the time and went to ask Madame Bai to let him go to the Great Imperial Temple to study. Because it was quiet there. Madame Bai didn't hesitate, hating that this little brat who couldn't be killed to quickly get out. Every time she saw him, she thought of her dead son. But her daughter was married to him, and she couldn't wish him well. She was also worried that Wei Wei Bai's future life would be too desolate. She could only wish for him to leave the Bai family as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Chichimu went out the door, and the flattering and gentle smile he directed at Madame Bai disappeared. There was only a gloomy indifference on his face. When he returned to the room, he saw Wei Wei Bai eating melon seeds and reading those storybooks. Her side profile was facing him, a smile on her lips. It was quiet and beautiful, making one's heart soften. Chichimu's mood improved a bit, and the hatred in his heart for the Bai family was somewhat diluted by her appearance. He originally didn't want to bring Wei Wei Bai along. He didn't know why, but when he thought that he would have to stay at the Great Imperial Temple for at least 4 or 5 months, he felt uncomfortable everywhere. If he put her here, wouldn't he be unable to torture her? Once the thought moved, it couldn't be suppressed. Chichimu's eyes darkened, his voice gentle. "Does Wei Wei want to go out and play?" Wei Wei Bai seemed to have discovered him and immediately turned around. Her eyes lit up, but she hesitated for a moment before saying, "Who wants to go out and play?" "There's nothing in the foo." It was so rare that his eyes were shining. However, he was still stubborn. Chichimu's face was full of regret. "I heard that the Great Imperial Temple's plum blossoms have bloomed. Also, in the Great Imperial Temple's kitchen, there are plum blossom cakes that can't be bought with money." Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, as if she was thinking about the plum forest in full bloom. And those desserts. In the end, she turned around, her back to Chichimu. "Who cares?" He spoke hesitantly and regretfully. Chichimu couldn't help but laugh silently. He didn't know what he was so happy about. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 52. Wei Wei Bai said she wouldn't go, but she was still dragged by Chichimu to the Great Imperial Temple on the outskirts. She said that she wanted to study here in peace and quiet. He had notified the temple in advance, paid the incense money, and had a place to eat and live. Wei Wei Bai entered the temple and found that Chi Chimu didn't bring a single female servant, and the manservant had also been sent back. She trembled. System smash, Chi Chimu, that pervert's next torture isn't going to make me wash clothes and clean in the ice and snow, right? System, how could that be? It's that simple. You have to bring the water to wash your feet, wait on you to scrub your back, organize your books. There's so much work that you can't finish. Don't worry. Wei Wei Bai, in addition to the main system, her home system could also be fed to the dogs. She didn't mind. Chapter 845. After entering the temple, the side rooms were already cleaned. But Chi Chimu wasn't satisfied with the monk's sloppy treatment. He turned to Wei Wei Bai and said, "As my wife, won't you show some appreciation? Look, this dust is too thick. It's not enough to sweep one side. You should at least sprinkle some water and wipe it down." In the middle of winter, having someone wipe the room. It was enough torture. Wei Wei Bai herself wasn't willing, and with her character setting, it was even more impossible for her to be willing. So she straightforwardly sat down on the tallest table, her feet off the ground. She turned her head and said with a cold expression, "What does it have to do with me? These are all servants' work. Even if you torture me to death, I won't do it." No matter what, she was still the young miss of a large family. She didn't need her fingers to be stained with dirty water for the rest of her life. Chi Chimu's expression darkened. Without another word, he stretched out his arms on either side of her. Wei Wei Bai's cold face trembled. This was the after effect of being tidied up during this period of time. A trace of a smile flashed through his dark eyes, but his voice was very cold. "I want to study, so the fewer people the better. Didn't I bring you here to serve me?" Wei Wei Bai was anxious, her face red with anger. "Don't flatter yourself. Who will serve you? When have you ever served me?" Chi Chimu lowered his eyes and suddenly lowered his head, placing his face by her neck and deeply inhaling her orchid fragrance. This kind of smell that used to be linked to his death, making him feel uncomfortable no matter how he smelled it. Now, it had become one of his favorite smells. He said in a hoarse voice, "Haven't I served you very well in bed?" Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened, her face red. Finally, she couldn't help but admit defeat. "Sweep, I'm done sweeping." Saying this, she pushed him away and jumped off the table. In the end, Chi Chimu's hands clasped her waist and pushed her back to sit at the table. He stood up straight again and said with an indifferent expression, "By the time you're done, you won't necessarily be done by tomorrow. Sit down obediently." With that, Chi Chimu turned, rolled up his sleeves, and nimbly began to sprinkle water and wipe the room. His movements were very fast, and all the tables, chairs, and floor were wiped clean. While cleaning up, he also packed up his luggage and books. In an orderly and swift manner, the entire room was tidied up neatly in an instant. Chi Chimu carried the bucket out, and when he came back in again, he was holding a large bouquet of blooming plum blossoms. He put the flowers into the empty vase. The somewhat tacky vase was suddenly set off by the plum blossoms. He stood beside the flowers. His handsome appearance was even more dazzling than the flowers. After Chi Chimu finished arranging the flowers, he turned around and caught her gaze. The look in her eyes was so strange. There seemed to be a hint of shyness of a girl, but it also seemed to be angry about something. Then, she looked away. The corners of her eyes were red, so he looked at her for a while before looking away. After tidying up, the monk delivered the vegetarian meal. Wei Wei Bai didn't mind. She ate anything when she was hungry. Besides, there was also the dessert after the meal. Everything was satisfied. During the meal, Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying, "You're pretty neat. Have you learned how to clean up?" Chichimu paused in his eating and raised his eyes to look at her. His eyes were dark, and then he sneered as if nothing had happened. Learned. I've been bullied by your family since I was young. Do you think I have servants to take care of me? Even my meals are leftovers. You want to learn this bit of house cleaning skills? Wei Bai was mocked and ridiculed, and she stared at him foolishly. She didn't know why he was suddenly angry. Chapter 846. Chichimu saw her like this and knew that his sudden sarcasm was somewhat untimely. He wasn't an old woman who liked to nag about his miseries everywhere. His face was cold as he stuffed rice into his mouth, not looking at Wei Bai. Suddenly, a piece of fried tofu appeared in his bowl. Chichimu's chopsticks paused. Wei Bai forced herself to remain calm. If you're not full, then eat more. What are you complaining about? This sounded like something she would say. At most, I'll bully you in the future and not starve you. I'll give you a servant so you don't have to sweep the floor. She coldly snorted. Chichimu was silent for a moment before he sneered. Isn't it me bullying you? You can't bully me now. After his rebirth, when he didn't have any rights. She was the first one he held tightly in his hands, unable to break free from. Only he could bully her. Chichimu ate the fried tofu in his bowl and belatedly remembered. This was the first time she had given him something. For some reason, his heart became somewhat docile. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 55. Chichimu studied for several days before inquiring about the third prince's room. The third prince had come with a hidden identity. Apart from the shadow guards at his side, no one knew his identity. This was very advantageous to Chichimu. He planned to build a good foundation of friendship with the third prince in advance. The third prince had a shortcoming. He was overly sentimental. Especially those kinds of coincidental encounters, making friends without any purpose, could move his heart. Chichimu silently weaved a net, thinking step by step about the scene of their first meeting. The first time they met, he only needed to show his unique bearing. Only then would he be able to reveal his talent step by step. While he was at it, he would take out all of the third prince's preferences from his previous life and let the third prince treat him as a confidant. It should be about time. Chichimu finished his plan when he suddenly discovered that the room was somewhat empty. He looked up blankly and found that Wei Bai had disappeared. Chichimu immediately stood up from the chair and walked out the door, his face dark. She didn't even say a word when she went out. She didn't bring any maids with her. Wasn't she afraid of danger? Chichimu thought that no matter how bad her heart was, she was still an unmarried eldest miss who never stepped out of the house. After marrying him, she was even more restrained and not allowed to go out. He knew nothing about the dangers of the outside world. He hurried out to search, but the ground was covered in snow. There were plum trees everywhere in the Great Emperor Temple, and they were in full bloom. With Chichimu's keen sense of smell, he could smell a bit of orchid fragrance. He followed the scent. His heart tightened as he searched for it. When he finally found an old plum tree, he saw a familiar embroidered shoe poking out of the plum blossoms. Chichimu hastened his steps. The snowy ground was too slippery, and his footsteps were unsteady, almost staggering. When he arrived at the foot of the plum tree, he saw her hugging a plum tree branch. Her eyes were brimming with tears and she didn't dare to move. He climbed up the tree, but it was too high for him to come down. With tears in her eyes, she looked at him in surprise. Chichimu. Chichimu coldly raised his head to look at her, truly itching to fling his sleeves and leave. This was the first time he saw her tears. They were not tears of excitement, but of anger. He thought that she would encounter something when she went out, but she actually came to climb a tree. She was already so old, yet she still had a child's heart. Wei Wei Bai didn't know how to get down the tree and could only say with trepidation, "Chi Chimu, save me." This pitiful expression, coupled with her red and delicate face, was simply as cute and lively as a little flower fairy among the flowers. Chi Chimu saw her like this, and his tight heart finally relaxed, but his heartbeat sped up. Chapter 847. She kept pleading with him in a soft voice. This voice was different from the one on the bed, with a few more traces of sincerity. It was pleasing to the ear. He enjoyed her pleading enough before stretching out his arms. "Jump down, I'll catch you." Wei Wei Bai's face paled, and she immediately shook her head. His face darkened. "What, do you dislike me?" Wei Wei Bai became angry. "I don't believe you. You'll sprain your waist when you hold me. If I jump down, you won't be able to catch me." Chi Chimu's face reddened, somewhat embarrassed. He couldn't be bothered with his childishness and immediately said, "Isn't it because you ate too much and became too heavy?" If he hadn't been impulsive and wanted to toss her onto the bed. His usual physical strength really wasn't enough. He had been bullied for so many years that his body had long since become empty. After being reborn, to be able to work so hard to make up for it, it was already very good to train his physical strength. This woman still dared to dislike him. She had clearly been tossed around on the bed by him until she couldn't cry out. Wei Wei Bai tightly hugged the branch. "If I jump down, you'll definitely move aside. You won't hold me, and you won't be able to hold me." She just didn't trust his physical strength. For a moment, Chi Chimu forgot about his schemes, and the rationality and IQ in his mind disappeared along with her disdain. There was only the impulsiveness and ruthlessness of a young boy. "Come down, you still don't believe me. You'll freeze to death if you hang up there all night." Wei Wei Bai's body trembled, but she still didn't dare to come down. Chi Chimu was sized up by her suspicious gaze, and the fire in his heart slowly climbed up. He kicked the tree trunk, and it actually shook. Wei Wei Bai cried out in fright. Chi Chimu could have gone to get a ladder, but under her distrustful and disdainful gaze, an impulse surged up. He said coldly, "If you don't come down, you don't need to eat dinner. You don't need to eat that plum blossom cake and the newly made plum blossom shortcake." Such a vicious little heartless. She liked to eat these things. Chi Chimu thought for a moment. Fearing that he didn't have enough chips, he reluctantly said, "I'll buy you a few folktales books. Do you want to read them?" He dared not let her buy it herself. If she bought it, it would be too much. Only he could make the selection. Wei Wei Bai hesitated. She couldn't resist the temptation and said, "Then catch me. You must catch me." Chi Chimu raised an eyebrow and sneered. "You really don't believe me?" For the sake of the storybook and sweet cakes, Wei Wei Bai threw caution to the wind. She immediately let go of the plum branch, her skirt fluttering as she threw herself into Chi Chimu's arms. Chi Chimu was mentally prepared and retreated several steps with her in his arms, relieving his strength. Although his waist was bearing a lot of force, he was barely able to hold on. He hugged her tightly. What a burden. Wei Wei Bai hugged him tightly and refused to let go. When she finally confirmed that it was safe, she breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. Her smile was soft and sweet. She said softly, "I knew you would hug me and not let me fall on the ice." Chi Chimu really wanted to mock him. Just now, no matter who died, they wouldn't come down and didn't believe him at all. It was only because of the pastries and storybooks that she developed a little bit of trust in him. But looking at her smiling face, her eyes were shining. He didn't say anything and immediately walked back with her in his arms. Wei Wei Bai said, "You can put me down. Your waist can't hold on anymore, ba." Chi Chimu really exploded. Shut up. If you talk again, I'll kiss you. This threat made her immediately not dare to say anything. Once they were far away, an indifferent gaze was retracted from the window of the room next to the plum tree. He was a young man with a delicate appearance. He wasn't considered exquisite, but he had a noble temperament. Your Highness, did we disturb you? A shadow guard nimbly appeared behind him. The third prince shook his head, his eyes softening. Thinking of my brothers and sisters in the palace, Father King and Mother Empress don't have the slightest bit of affection, but to be able to see such a pure and sincere pair of lovers here, it can be considered that I didn't come in vain. Killing each other, scheming against each other. The third prince had seen too much and instead yearned for people who valued affection. After Wei Wei Bai returned, she had mocked Chi Chimu's waist. As a result, after dinner, just as she was about to take a bath, she was pressed down in the bathtub and experienced what was called broad shoulders, narrow hips, and a male dog's waist. It was like he had eaten dynamite as he pressed her down and said, "Did I sprain my waist? When do I think I sprained my waist?" Even if Wei Wei Bai used a sticker, the remnant soul left in her body was still her own. Was she someone who would let others bully her? After being bullied, her body couldn't help but reach out and push him. And then Chi Chimu sprained his waist. Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 849. Wei Wei Bai's face flushed red, and she said angrily, "You shameless scoundrel, you read books on propriety, justice, integrity, and shame. How can you not have the slightest bit of scholarly demeanor? You're simply a rogue, shameless." Chi Chimu smiled at her, not the slightest bit angry. Then he clasped the bowl with his fingers, took a deep breath, and raised his head to drink the medicine in one gulp. The entrance was very, very bitter. Chi Chimu frowned, but when he understood what had been added to the bowl, he happily relaxed his brows. It was coptis. Then he calmly handed the remaining bit of medicinal juice to Wei Wei Bai. It didn't seem bitter at all. Wei Wei Bai looked at him nervously. "You don't feel anything." Chi Chimu endured the bitterness and faintly raised an eyebrow. "What should I feel? Like a knife twisting in the abdomen, or a broken liver and intestines? You vicious woman, you poison me." Wei Wei Bai saw his calm expression and couldn't help but retort, "Who poisoned me? I won't dirty my own hands." Chi Chimu looked at her suspiciously. Wei Wei Bai had a guilty conscience and hurriedly poured the medicine in the bowl into her mouth. After drinking, she looked like a villain intoxicated with success. "Did you see if I poisoned you?" Then a bitter taste that made her tongue explode swept through her taste buds in an instant. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, and then her entire face wrinkled like a bun. She hurriedly spat and found that it was still bitter, so she quickly went to drink water. Seeing Wei Wei Bai being forced to turn in circles by the bitter taste of the coptis, Chi Chimu finally laughed. He couldn't help it at all. He had poisoned himself with a pile of coptis, and in the end, he was asking for trouble. Wei Wei Bai hated to death. She slammed the cup on the table, the bitter taste still lingering on the tip of her tongue. "Chi Chimu, you crafty old bastard." Chi Chimu choked and coughed, almost laughing himself to death. It's a pretty good description. In his previous life, he had been called a crafty old fox and cursed to death. Hearing this curse, he really missed it. The bitterness of the coptis in his mouth, along with the shadows of the deaths of his previous life, slowly faded away. Instead, it was replaced by her increasingly distinct appearance. Bad, brainless, and unable to tell good from bad. He didn't know how to tell good from bad, and he didn't know how to endure and give in. Only her appearance was adorable. Her only advantage was that she was cute. Chi Chimu thought critically and cautiously. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. The system looked at the cute, evil, little girl host who had regressed from a childish state to a fertilized egg and was now playing pranks every day. She also looked at Zhongxing, who didn't properly develop his ambitions after coming back. Instead, he spent all his time in love. Although it was called revenge, it was actually just a primary school male lead who bullied the girl he liked every day. These two people's poisonous dog food. He had completely lost his appetite. Therefore, it had to buy an extra bowl of instant noodles to relieve pressure. Only after Chi Chimu had healed his waist injury did he consider approaching the third prince. He thought of the hairpin he saw in his previous life. It was found when Wei Wei Bai's maidservant was tidying up the warehouse. Because he looked good. It was worn by Wei Wei Bai for a while. However, he found it familiar. Later on, he saw that it had the special pattern of his family on it. That was why he used a trick to get the hairpin. Only then did he discover the enormous wealth. In this life, because his encounter with Wei Wei Bai had changed, the timing of his search for the hairpin had also changed. Chi Chimu wasn't in a hurry, because being able to meet the third prince earlier was more useful than any wealth. He considered it for a moment and inquired about the three people who had recently come to study and live in the great imperial temple. One of them lived under the old plum tree. The young master in the best wing should be the third prince. Chapter 850. Chi Chimu smiled confidently. He picked up the flute and was about to leave. But he felt that running to someone's window to play the flute was too purposeful. He saw Wei Wei Bai drawing on the paper in boredom and couldn't help but walk over and grab her wrist. "Come, listen to me play the flute." Wei Wei Bai looked disdainful. "What flute are you playing, you poor scholar?" Chi Chimu's face turned cold. "Are you going to listen or not?" Wei Wei Bai trembled, afraid that he would torture her again. She immediately stood up. Threatening to coax an audience, Chi Chimu finally confirmed that the foolproof conditions for a perfect encounter had been met. Wei Wei Bai was pulled to the side of the old plum tree and sat on a low branch, her feet still touching the ground. Chi Chimu leaned against the plum tree, looking like a young master, full of magnificence. He suddenly thought of something. "Why did you climb the tree last time?" Wei Wei Bai said somewhat awkwardly, "Wasn't it because the little monk in the great imperial temple's kitchen said that if I wanted more plum pastries, I needed to pick the flowers myself? Didn't I see that this tree has the most flowers?" Chi Chimu was simply angered to laughter by her reason. She only cared about eating, forgetting to protect her life. He couldn't help but lightly tap Wei Wei Bai's head with the flute. "Really stupid. What's the use of picking flowers? Just use money." Wei Wei Bai hurriedly covered her head, the corners of her eyes red as she glared at him. Chi Chimu was dazed for a moment before turning his face away. He picked up the flute and gently blew. The flute's tune was the third prince's favorite. It was also composed by the third prince's deceased mother. This tune was very good. It was the sentimental and gentle feeling of a young girl encountering love. It was also widely circulated, so no one would be suspicious if he played this tune. This tune should be too gentle and affectionate, often used to express one's love for a certain woman. Chi Chimu couldn't help but look sideways again, only to see Wei Wei Bai holding her face with both hands, listening with a somewhat gentle expression. She seemed to be enjoying it very much. This expression, his heart skipped a beat, but he didn't dare to look again. He continued to play the flute with his eyes lowered. However, he was distracted and did not pay attention to his surroundings. Then, a figure slowly appeared beside the plum blossom tree. He was dressed in a low-key light-colored robe and had a slender figure. He stepped on the flowers as he walked over. His movements were neither too fast nor too slow. He had a noble air about him. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be shocked and looked up. However, she saw that the man had a gentle and nostalgic expression on his face as he listened to the sound of the flute very seriously. The system said, "Third Prince, the male leads Chief Luo Baiji, the future emperor of this world." Actually, the system did not need to say anything. When she looked up, she saw a shining golden crown on Luo Baiji's head. Was this the legendary crown? It was so shiny and rich. Chi Chimu's attention was originally on Luo Baiji, but from the corner of his eye, he saw Wei Wei Bai staring blankly at Luo Baiji. That focused look in his eyes. That gentle gaze. When did she look at him so seriously? She didn't even look at him like that when she was begging for mercy on the bed. Could it be that she had taken a fancy to Luo Baiji? Chi Chimu felt a burst of sourness in his heart. His breathing became heavier, but the sound of the flute sounded more tactful. Wei Wei Bai finished looking at the crown before moving her gaze away. Then she looked at Chi Chimu, only to find that the other party was looking at her with an abnormally gloomy gaze. That dark gaze was like that of a venomous snake, as if it wanted to eat a person. Wei Wei Bai, the target's face darkened at the slightest disagreement. After the flute was played, Chi Chimu did not want to continue playing. He suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart. Chapter 851. He changed his expression and gently said to Wei Wei Bai, "Wife, does it sound good?" Wei Wei Bai. Wife? Aren't you ashamed of this title? She couldn't help but look at the only audience, that third prince. As a result, Chi Chimu's eyes turned cold, and he reached out to pinch her chin. Then he smiled tenderly. "Didn't you say that this husband is too pedantic and doesn't know how to give you a bit of a surprise? I specially went to learn this song. I heard that it's what you girls like the most." Wei Wei Bai looked at him with disdain, very loyal to her character setting. "You play it too badly. Where is the essence of the original song? There's no surprise. Listening to you play the song, it's more like being scared to death." Chi Chimu had been nursing a fire. What did she mean by always looking at the third prince? Was it because she took a fancy to other men's good looks, or because of their low-key but expensive clothes and decorations? Could it be that she knew that Luo Baiji was a member of the imperial family, so her heart was moved? He played the flute, but she disliked it. She was focused and happy looking at other men. He hadn't died yet, but she wanted to blossom first and then jump over the wall. The gentleness on Chi Chimu's face couldn't be maintained, and he fiercely threatened, "If it doesn't sound good, then throw away the extra sweet cakes I ordered to make. In any case, it's useless to feed them to a wooden person like you who doesn't understand music." Wei Wei Bai still broke a bit of her character setting for the sake of sweet cakes. This era was too boring. Besides eating, she didn't have any other pursuits. So she immediately tugged at his sleeve, acting cute with great familiarity. "No, it's good, it's very good. Husband, any song you play sounds good." Chi Chimu heard her call him husband and his breathing became somewhat unstable. He forced himself to hold on and coldly snorted. "That sweet cake is your husband. You only know how to eat. Don't you know that you're so heavy that you're going to break the bathtub from sitting on it?" Wei Wei Bai anxiously said, "What bathtub from sitting on it? It's clearly you who insisted on squeezing in, that's why it broke." Wei Wei Bai only reacted after hearing this. She quickly glanced at the audience next to her. Although the third prince still had a noble and indifferent expression on his face, the corners of his mouth could not help but curl up into a smile. She immediately got up and fiercely pushed Chi Chimu away. Lifting her skirt, she turned and ran, her face flushed red. When Chi Chimu saw her run away, his feet almost didn't follow his mind as his body chased after her. It was like a butterfly chasing after a fleeing flower. It was obvious that she was attracted to him. However, He only reacted after taking a few steps forward. The third prince. He glanced at the third prince who had just been attracted over. That familiar yet youthful face let him know that this was the best opportunity to get to know him. But thinking that Wei Wei Bai didn't know where to go, he wasn't in the mood to exchange pleasantries. He thought of what he had just said to Wei Wei Bai. It was indeed inappropriate to discuss such a private matter in public. No matter how thick-skinned he was, he couldn't withstand such a dirty joke. Chi Chimu could only hurriedly nod to Luo Baiji and say, "Sorry for the disturbance." Then she directly gave up the opportunity to get to know the third prince and turned around to chase after that little bastard who only knew how to eat and was not the least bit worrisome. Chi Chimu ran away. Standing in place, Luo Baiji finally couldn't help but laugh. It was really too amusing. He really had never seen a married couple with such a cute and likable way of interacting. They were clearly bickering like a pair of clowns. But it made people feel that this was what it meant to be in love. The shadow guard next to him was gratified. It had been a long time since he saw the third prince laugh. In the future, it would be good to let that couple get closer. Unknowingly, Chi Chimu's goal of obtaining the third prince's favorable impression was accomplished in a very strange way. Chapter 852. Chi Chimu had run halfway when he caught Wei Wei Bai. Their first perfect meeting with the third prince had been ruined. What made him even more irritable was, had she taken a fancy to the third prince? So Chi Chimu dragged Wei Wei Bai back for a joint hearing. He pushed her onto the bed. Then he blocked the bedside and smiled coldly. "What, just now you saw a man and you were so shy that you ran away?" Wei Wei Bai was at a loss, belatedly understanding what he was saying. She immediately exploded. "Chi Chimu, am I that kind of shameless woman?" Chi Chimu thought of his past life. In the palace, he seemed to have heard that Madame Bai wanted to send Wei Wei Bai into the palace to be the third prince's concubine. When he thought of that, his eyes turned red. If she hadn't died. She was the third prince's woman in his past life. So when they met in this life, this woman's eyes were fixed on him. He smiled coldly, most of his face shadowed, very sinister. "I don't know if you're shameless or not, but if you dare to set your eyes on another man and have an affair with me, I will kill you." The last three words were as cold as the language of hell. It made one's scalp numb. Saying this, Chi Chimu didn't care that it was daytime and had already pounced. He was already very familiar with how to subdue her. Coldly and swiftly, he bound her restless hands and pressed down on her struggling legs, imprisoning her under him. She couldn't go anywhere, and running away was useless. He could catch her at any time. Wei Wei Bai's face was filled with fear. "Chi Chimu, get lost for me." He scared her. Chi Chimu pinched her face and sneered, "What, you're very happy looking at other men, but when I'm not by your side, you're going to pounce over." In his past life, she might have been the third prince's concubine. It made him gnash his teeth at the thought. She didn't know if her previous life would affect this life. Could it be that she fell in love at first sight? Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She burst into tears and said angrily, "It's none of your business even if I throw myself at him. Don't you hate me? The more fickle I am, the more annoying I am. Wouldn't you be the happiest? Why are you angry?" Chi Chimu was enraged. "You really want to climb the wall to find a man for me?" Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth and glared at him. "What's wrong with finding a man? Are you jealous?" These words were like a clap of thunder that struck Chi Chimu. His fingers trembled and he almost couldn't hold down the lively Wei Wei Bai. Jealousy. He was not stupid. In fact, he was very intelligent. During this period of time with Wei Wei Bai, the thoughts of tormenting her in his heart turned into eager tenderness. When he was in bed, he began to worry about whether he would hurt her. He even carefully helped her clean her body. He couldn't bear to let her do any of the servants' work. He knew that her temperament was delicate and she had never done this before. He would rather do it himself, and there wasn't a trace of unwillingness in his heart. He was aware of all these signs. But he didn't dare to think too deeply. However, her words completely shattered his ostrich mentality. Jealousy, he was indeed jealous. That kind of unbearable sourness and fear of loss intertwined together. It could simply drive a person crazy. Chichimu couldn't help but tighten his grip on her bound hands. He said word by word, "Who's jealous? I won't be jealous, but you are disgracing my reputation by finding another man. I will make you regret being born into this world." Such vicious words. Even in his previous life, when he was eradicating dissidents, he had never said these words. Chapter 853. But he used it to threaten Wei Bai, who only knew how to make a small fuss. Although her heart was bad, she could never be bad to the right place. Chichimu was afraid that he would regret it. He wouldn't like her. He couldn't like her at all. Even if he was crazy, he couldn't like her. The Bai family was what he wanted to eradicate, and she was also one of the murderers who had killed him in his previous life. After eradicating the Bai family, he kept her by his side. It was just to see her in so much pain that she wished she was dead, suffering day and night under the body of her enemy, powerless to struggle. This was his revenge plan. Wei Bai heard his words and froze, her face pale. She gritted her teeth and said, "Reputation, reputation, you just care about your damn reputation. Get off my body." Chichimu wordlessly began to tear off her clothes. Wei Bai was like a stubborn donkey, struggling with all her might. "Chichimu, if you like reputation so much, then sleep with your reputation. Why did you come looking for me?" Chichimu buried his head and worked hard. "Get off, get off. Don't you feel uncomfortable with a woman you don't like?" "Not uncomfortable." Chichimu's entire body trembled, and there was even some fear in his eyes, hidden in his dark expression. He softly repeated, "How can I be jealous? I can't." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. After this incident, Wei Bai began a Cold War. This Cold War lasted for several days, mocking and ridiculing Chichimu every day, in addition to disdain. Chichimu didn't know if he felt guilty or not. He actually didn't dare to be too forceful. Their situation of strength seemed to have been reversed. After the system finished kneading the instant noodles, it remembered that it had a host. "What's wrong? Why are you still hating me?" Wei Bai leisurely trimmed her nails. "Am I not teaching Chichimu how to rest and recuperate as a husband of the 3 obediences and 4 virtues? I don't show my might, don't protest, so how can he understand how difficult it is for my lively and jumping sweetness? Men, once cold, understand love." The system was silent. Lively and jumping sweetness. Wasn't that a hypocrite who stirred up trouble? The host would always have a perfect misconception of his own position. When Chichimu went out, he deliberately ran into the 3rd prince and successfully played a game of chess with him. The 3rd prince was unexpectedly easy to get along with. He seemed to have a good impression of him. But halfway through the game, the 3rd prince casually asked about Wei Bai. His heart immediately turned cold, and he immediately became vigilant. Why did he ask? Did he fall for Wei Bai? When Chichimu thought of that, even a plan to beat up the 3rd prince appeared in his mind. Fortunately, the 3rd prince was only envious of their deep love. She also said that 2 people who were so deeply in love must be kind and pure, trustworthy people. Bai. Vicious. Selfish. Wei Wei. Chi Mu. Scheming. Dark and twisted. Kind and pure. Was the third prince's eyes clouded by something? How could he tell? Even someone as good at enduring as Chi Chimu couldn't help but twitch his lips when he heard this description, almost revealing his true face. The emperor that he had assisted in his previous life. To see someone so perfectly miss all the correct answers, fine, the emperor that he chose, he had to kneel and hug his thigh to death. Perhaps because he heard Wei Wei Bai, his mind was distracted while brushing up the third prince's good impression. She had ignored him for 5 days. In the past, she would at least order him around, scold him, disdain him, and even use her delicate little hands to hit him. Chapter 854. She wanted him to clean the house, make him go get more plum cakes, and warm her bed for her to sleep. Thinking about it like this, was he a masochist? He actually hated that she couldn't be like this. It was better than ignoring him. She even gave him a sidelong glance. Perhaps she saw that he was absent-minded. The third prince asked, "Do you have some urgent matter?" Chi Chimu's mouth was quick. "No, I just want to," he stopped in time. The third prince was very understanding. "I understand. Newlyweds should go back and accompany your wife." Chi Chimu wanted to explain, but seeing the other's clear eyes, as if seeing through everything, he could only take back his lies. Then he gave up the opportunity to get closer to the third prince. And he came back again. He was still carrying some plum cakes in his hand. The reminder of Chi Chimu's return had just sounded. Wei Wei Bai was very natural and smooth. She quickly and skillfully propped up her face with both hands, a trace of melancholy on her face. Her eyes were faint and sad as she looked out the half-open window at the blooming plum blossoms. Angle, posture, expression. There was absolutely no dead angle. Chi Chimu stepped through the door and looked up to see Wei Wei Bai sitting at the table, her side facing him. Her figure was petite and thin, her slender, snow-white fingers propping up her face. There was no delicate and indifferent expression on her face. Instead, there was some cute baby fat propped up by her hands. But this couldn't compare to the fragile and helpless sadness on her face. When was the arrogant, brainless, and selfish Wei Wei Bai who didn't care about others also had such a sorrowful and weak expression? She had always been a little hedgehog. Uncomfortable and prickly. She seemed to have just noticed him and dazedly turned back to look at him. The corners of her eyes were red, and tears could be seen faintly in her eyes. That kind of silent grievance overflowed. Chi Chimu couldn't speak for a moment and could only stand foolishly, the cake in his hand shaking a few times. When Wei Wei Bai saw him, she immediately rubbed her eyes. Then she snorted and shifted her sitting position, turning her back to him. Chi Chimu pursed his lips, a wave of anger stifling in his heart. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly moved to stand behind her. "Do you want some cake?" Bai Wei Wei didn't say anything. Chi Chimu stared at her back for a moment before suppressing his voice, doing his best to be gentle. "It was just made. I also asked them to put more honey in it." Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. She didn't even give him a cold snort. Such a cold war between Wei Wei Bai. He was at a loss for what to do, and even his entire body felt uncomfortable. He would rather she scold him. At least when she was scolding him, her eyes were very beautiful. Her gaze was so bright that it seemed like there was light in them. And those eyes were filled with his shadow. Chi Chimu couldn't help but move, wanting to see her. However, Wei Wei Bai discovered his intentions and changed her position, continuing to face him with her back. She was clearly not looking at him. This was the first time Chi Chimu had been so thoroughly ignored by someone. His fingers clenched so tightly that the rope was about to cut into his flesh, but he didn't feel any pain. He placed the cake on the table and opened the wrapper, revealing the beautiful plum blossom cake inside. Wei Wei Bai glanced sideways. Chi Chimu's eyes brightened. In the end, she only glanced and didn't look much before turning her head away again. She didn't even say a word of disdain. Chi Chimu's eyes were gloomy. After enduring for so many days, he finally exploded. He grabbed Wei Wei Bai, forcing her to turn back. Wei Wei Bai was pulled by him, and her entire body fell back, straight into his arms. Chapter 855. The man's embrace was warm and carried a faintly discernible cold fragrance. That fragrance was actually stained with the orchid fragrance of her body. However, this pleasant smell was unable to cover up his violent and brutal actions. Chi Chimu reached out and clasped her chin, turning her face back to look at her pair of black, bright eyes filled with fear. He looked at her coldly and sneered. "What, you really dare to ignore me? Have I been too good to you, making you forget your identity?" His hand gripped her frail, slender arm with some force. His entire person was filled with a terrifying killing intent. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled, and she finally spoke. "Chi Chimu, who do you think I am to you? Your toy, or the target of your revenge? If you're so hateful, you might as well push me into ice water and drown me. In any case, it's not your first time. Why restrain me like this, mutually tormenting each other?" After she finished speaking, her tears failed to live up to her expectations and fell. This cry was silent, extremely aggrieved and pitiful. It made one's heart throb with pain. Chi Chimu used to be happy and excited when he saw her cry. But now, his mood was very bad. He couldn't maintain the gloomy expression on his face as he sensed the fragmented, weak sourness in his heart. His hand gripping her chin shook uncontrollably. He wanted to fret and stop her from crying. But his fingertips couldn't help but rub against her delicate face. She cried pitifully, her face somewhat pale. His fingers pressed against her warm cheeks, as if wanting to give her a bit more color. Wei Wei Bai with flushed cheeks was so beautiful. Almost without thinking, he lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was out of control. With a burning and strong possessiveness, he recklessly plundered the sweetness of her lips. Wei Wei Bai was held by him and could only weakly raise her neck, allowing him to take what he wanted. Chi Chimu said that her physical strength was poor, but it wasn't the kind of poor women. It was very easy to control a delicate Wei Wei Bai. So Wei Wei Bai could only lean against his chest, her cheeks dizzy from his kisses, her eyes soft and unable to struggle. She glared at him angrily. Chi Chimu's breathing was chaotic, the gloomy and indifference in his eyes replaced by an even more intense heat. He lowered his head awkwardly, released Wei Wei Bai, and took 2 steps back. Then, as if he wanted to hide something, he picked up a sweet cake and gently brought it to her lips. "Eat some. It was still warm just now. The desserts were already cold." But his fingers were unbearably hot. Wei Wei Bai's face was cold and pale, just like the elegant and delicate plum blossoms outside the window. Her eyes were full of angry condemnation. Then, she reached out and slapped the sweet cake out of his hand. She stood up and met Chi Chimu's complicated gaze. Gritting her teeth, she angrily said, "I hate you, hate your self-righteousness and pettiness, hate your unreasonable and perverted coercion, hate even more when you bully me. I want to divorce you." As soon as he said this, Chi Chimu didn't say anything, only looking at her solemnly. She was clearly scolding him. But his heart was beating like a drum, this violent heartbeat. He could barely control his emotions. He suppressed his surging emotions and revealed a smile. "Divorce me?" Unfortunately, the law states that only men can divorce women. I won't let go. When you die, you can only die in my family's graveyard. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, her eyes reddening. Chi Chimu turned his face away, clenching his fists. He suddenly turned and walked out with quick steps. When he was far away, he couldn't see the woman anymore. Chi Chimu punched the temple wall, his eyes burning red, his baleful aura frightening. He gasped for breath, the beating in his chest unable to calm down. It beat against his chest again and again. This heart wasn't at peace at all. Just like Wei Wei Bai, she wasn't easy to worry about. Chi Chimu pressed against his chest and leaned against the wall, standing dazedly for a long time. Snowflakes fell, floating above his head. He seemed to have just woken up, laughing at himself. He really couldn't deceive himself. How could he, like such a heartless little fool? Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 75. Chapter 856. After Chi Chimu left, Wei Wei Bai sat down in a chair, exhausted. Her eyes were still red as she began to gnaw on a sweet cake. It was rare to eat a food she liked in a plane. She didn't know the next meal. This cake was made too authentically. The system watched from beginning to end, thinking that there was some small side task to torment people. In the end, when it looked up, there was nothing above its head. It asked, is it okay to anger the male lead and make him run away? For its disappointing host, its heart had been broken. Even halfway through the book of 1,000 moves against the host, its heart softened. It felt that after interacting with each other for so many planes, there would always be some feelings. So as a decathlon super good system, it should be a bit gentler. Wei Wei Bai, if I don't do this, the favorability will be stuck and won't go up. Chi Chimu is a man with a strong sense of inferiority. His goal in life is to take revenge and let himself live in incomparable glory. Speaking to this point, she couldn't help but sit up straight, giving this useless system a bit of science. This kind of man, you have to give him a blow when his feelings are about the same. Let him know that his actions will hurt me. Such an indifferent protest could make the other party begin to face their hatred. Discover the true feelings in their hearts. Wei Wei Bai sighed. So now give him the cold shoulder, until he can't stand it, and he will naturally let go of his vengeful mentality. The system was silent for a moment before finally sighing faintly. Wei Wei Bai's scalp tingled from its sigh. ? The system spoke earnestly. You can be considered to have gone through hundreds of battles and have more experience. Before, you couldn't even kiss, but now you can take the initiative to roll in the sheets. I am deeply gratified. Wei Wei Bai, why does this praise sound so awkward? When Chi Chimu returned, he had already returned to normal. He was indifferent and gentle, looking like a hypocrite. Wei Wei Bai ignored him. When it was time to sleep at night, Chi Chimu warmed the quilt with a water bottle and said, "You sleep, I'm going to read a book." Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything and went straight to bed. She nestled in a warm spot and closed her eyes to take a nap. After Chi Chimu had been fidgeting for a good while, when he came over, he found that she had fallen asleep. He stood by the bed for a long time before he took off his clothes and went to bed. In the dim yellow candlelight, he looked at her curled-up body with her back to him. Finally, he couldn't help but reach out and carefully pull her into his embrace, until her entire body fit perfectly into his chest. He heaved a sigh of relief, but his heart was still beating rapidly. He buried his face in her hair and smelled like orchids. This fragrance was completely devoid of any shadow. There was only tenderness and even peace of mind. He hugged her, inhaled her fragrance, and fell asleep peacefully. The next day, he woke up early and got out of bed before she did. Afterwards, Chi-Chimu went to the kitchen and spent some extra silver to prepare some of Wei Wei Bai's favorite vegetarian dishes. There was also the plum blossom cake that she always ordered every day. When he brought it back, she was sitting on the bed. Her long hair was messy, and her eyes were still sleepy. So cute that it made one's heart soften. Chi-Chimu felt that he was sick. How did he discover his feelings? Looking at her again, he felt that everything about her was good. He pursed his lips and said indifferently, "Get up and tidy up. Let's eat." Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes at him, not knowing how delicate and lovely her small appearance was. Chi-Chimu's eyes darkened, but he didn't impulsively rush over to push her down. He looked at the dishes on the table with forbearance. Chapter 857. It was all her favorite food. She should know his intention to soften. As a result, Wei Wei Bai finished eating without any expression, as though she couldn't tell that he had specially ordered these dishes to be prepared. For the first time, Chi-Chimu, who had never allowed to suffer a loss, endured and didn't let her know. This was what he did for her. It was as though saying it would put him at a disadvantage. He sullenly watched her heartlessly finish eating and didn't move his chopsticks much. After waiting for a long time, Wei Wei Bai left on her own. Chi-Chimu sat at the table, his entire body gloomy. He threw his chopsticks on the table, wanting to slap the table and threaten her to pay attention to him. But when he looked up, he saw Wei Wei Bai running to the charcoal stove and stirring the flames to warm herself. The warm light of the fire shone on her white, jade-like face. Her eyelashes were like butterflies, and her eyes were clear and clean. Her entire person was truly warm and lovable. If he didn't know her nature. With her appearance, who knew how many men would be charmed away? Chi-Chimu endured, but in the end, he couldn't bear to continue using insidious methods to control her obedience. He still didn't know her nature, but he was still bewitched by her. Chi-Chimu's feelings for Wei Wei Bai were too complicated, so he could only avoid continuing to win the third prince's trust. The third prince was also happy to find a friend to pass the time within the quiet and boring Great Imperial Temple. Chi-Chimu knew the third prince's thoughts and used the method of chess friends to slowly introduce the topic of politics. As expected, the third prince looked at him differently. The two people got along harmoniously. Chi-Chimu had worked for him in his past life and naturally knew how to cater to his interests. But looking at the third prince's increasingly trusting gaze, the heartless person in his room treated him coldly day after day. He would occasionally reveal a complicated expression. The third prince asked, "What, does Chimu have some difficulties?" Chi-Chimu hesitated for a moment before saying indifferently, "No." The third prince was like a woman inquiring about gossip, asking with some interest, "Is the one at home angry with you?" During this time, he had been close to Chi-Chimu and naturally knew about Wei Wei Bai's Cold War. A trace of embarrassment flashed across Chi-Chimu's calm face. His lips moved before he resigned himself to his fate. A woman's mind is truly hard to guess. He believed that during this period of time, he had rushed to curry favor with her, and everyone could see it. However, she took his concession as a matter of course and didn't feel the slightest bit of closeness to him. However, the third prince was very mature and said, "It's you who don't know how to please. Women need to be coaxed. With your cold face every day, even I am about to be scared away, let alone a little girl." Because the third prince was 2 years older than Chi-Chimu. Therefore, when he addressed Wei Wei Bai, the third prince would call her little sister. It was also a tacit agreement that Chi-Chimu had already obtained a place in his heart and obtained his trust. Chi-Chimu said somewhat awkwardly, "Coax?" He had already fetched water for her to wash her feet. Was that not enough to coax her? After coldly washing her feet, she went to sleep on the bed that he had warmed up in advance. Then, she continued to ignore him with her back facing him. Several times, Chichimu almost couldn't suppress the dark distortion in his heart and forced himself on her. But this impulse was bitterly suppressed. He wasn't a fool. Previously, obtaining Wei Bai had already made her particularly loathe him. If he wanted to change the way the two of them interacted, he couldn't continue to force it. The third prince shook his head. This coaxing needs to rely on a mouth that knows how to sweet-talk and honeyed words, rely on shameless pestering, and more importantly, wholeheartedly devoted actions. Chapter 858. This summary was rather interesting. But when he thought of the third prince's previous life, the harem was a mess of intrigue. Chichimu also felt that this guy's words weren't too reliable. He hesitated. Blindly obeying her, where is the least bit of a man's backbone? The third prince hated iron for not becoming steel. Do you want a tender and sweet little wife, or do you want your man's backbone? These words made Chichimu silent. Wei Bai had nothing to do for several days. Counting the time, she knew that the Cold War was about to end. After all, the Cold War was to force Chichimu to see his heart clearly. It was fine as long as the goal was achieved. Don't push it too far, so as to avoid dropping favorability. Wei Bai was just thinking about what reason to use to end the situation of ignoring her. The door was pushed open, and the delicate fragrance of plum blossoms wafted over. Chichimu slowly walked in, holding a large bouquet of plum blossom branches. Wei Bai turned to look at him, her eyes puzzled. Chichimu thought of the third prince's flowers. It was said that before husband and wife, they should occasionally have some fun. Sending a few flowers, a few gifts, or a few sweet words would have a good effect. He originally didn't want to do so. But when he passed by the plum blossom forest and saw the brilliant flowers, he stood dazed for a long time and couldn't help but break off some good-looking branches. But when he really came before her, Chichimu holding the flowers suddenly fell silent. Wei Bai looked at the flowers in his hands and understood. He was going to send flowers. After sending flowers, he would reluctantly show a shy expression, and then soften his attitude at night. It would definitely increase the favorability. Wei Bai was already about to reach out to receive the flowers. Chichimu lowered his head and walked over, then walked directly to the vase. The vase that hadn't had flowers for several days was replaced with a large bouquet of plum blossoms. Wei Bai quickly retracted her fingers and clenched them into a fist, almost reaching out to take the flowers. Chichimu arranged the flowers, his back to Wei Bai. His indifferent handsome face was dyed with traces of red. He didn't expect that a simple act of sending flowers would be so difficult. Even afraid of rejection. Chichimu heard his own heartbeat, throbbing violently. He suppressed this restlessness, regained his calm expression, and turned to look at her. However, he found that Wei Bai was peeking at him, although she quickly looked away. But Chichimu's mind was still moved. He suddenly walked over and held her wrist. In his palm, her slender wrist was so fragile and easily restrained. Chichimu couldn't help but pinch her before saying, "Come with me." Wei Bai frowned. She wanted to say something, but she remembered her Cold War with him. She just rolled her eyes at him and refused to move. Chichimu was in a deadlock with her, but her delicate ears were somewhat red. His heart skipped a few beats, and his tone suddenly became heavy. "If you're not leaving, then let's go to bed." When Wei Bai heard this, she turned around and glared at him fiercely. Her beautiful eyes were full of annoyance. Chichimu pursed his lips before saying, "Are you going or not?" Wei Bai frowned and hesitated for a moment before she reluctantly got up and followed him out. Chichimu led her along, walking slowly. The great imperial temple was surrounded by plum trees. The petals of the plum blossoms scattered down, carrying a hint of romance. They walked to the east side of the great imperial temple, where there were the most plum trees. On the snowy ground, the red plum blossoms were in full bloom, more gorgeous and beautiful than flames. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly for a moment. Chi Chimu looked at her and found that she liked it, so he breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He, who had always been clear-headed, clearly knew that his feelings for her were wrong. Chapter 859. Wei Wei Bai swore that this was the plane where she spent the most substitute stickers. She didn't even dare to calculate whether the pitiful 30 life points from completing the mission could offset those substitute stickers. She was so haggard. The system also swore that this was the first time it had seen a plane with so many bullet screens. From time to time, there would be a damned army bombardment, a bombardment of core socialist values. It felt that it was already a qualified member of the egg team. It was so haggard. Chi Chimu's spirit had been very good recently. No matter what, Wei Wei Bai would start throwing things at him again, scold him, and occasionally hit him with her pink fists. Moreover, she would resume those unspeakable, laugh-inducing activities on the bed. Chi Chimu felt that his life was especially bright. Right, he had also won the third prince's trust. He had almost forgotten this matter. After staying in the great imperial temple for several months, Chi Chimu treated Wei Wei Bai differently. He couldn't bear to use any of those humiliating methods on her. Instead, he repeatedly made concessions to protect her. Everything that she ate or used had to go through his hands. Not a single trace of his previous ruthless and gloomy appearance could be seen. But Bai Weiwei was still as heartless as before, making things difficult for Chi Chimu at every turn. She also wanted to happily use sweet tricks on Chi Chimu, letting the favorability climb up. After all, sweet strategies were easy and enjoyable. Who liked to torture themselves, pondering every day how to scheme against their target? However, the imperial examination stumbling block forced her to go against Chi Chimu. After leaving the temple, Chi Chimu, after several months of studying and preparing, was about to enter the examination hall again. Wei Wei Bai's small imperial examination mission also reminded her. Stopped Chi Chimu from entering the examination hall. The time limit was 3 days. Wei Wei Bai looked at the 90 favorability she had obtained by selling her body and couldn't help but say, is there a hole in your main system's head? Would it die from giving a sweet strategy? Must it torment me to death before it's happy? The system said, there are sweet strategies, such as those where the male lead and the host are already in love, and then the male lead will follow the reincarnation cycle with his memories. He will fall in love with the host at first sight every day, and the second sight strategy mission is completed. Wei Wei Bai, what? There were no insane side quests, no unreliable idiotic system that dragged him down, and no unreasonable time limit for clearing the game. You've completed the mission after meeting him twice. The system said, no, I'm just in charge of the sweet strategy. I just need to show off my love. Wei Wei Bai, then why don't I have a mission to show off my love? The system was a little embarrassed. That's because you're a torturing guide. The sweet strategy route was easy to enjoy, so it was very difficult to snatch it. Generally, only an outstanding system with ability and background could snatch this kind of mission for its host. The oppressive route is all those incompetent people at the bottom of society. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before she said, I understand. To put it bluntly, her system was at the bottom of society. It was poor, incapable, and had no backdoor. All it could do was snatch some unpresentable and undesirable missions for its host. Suddenly, an image appeared in her mind. In the bleak cold wind, a tattered and desolate system wrapped in newspapers, rummaging through the trash for some leftovers. It was poor and haggard. It was obviously tired to death, but for its host who had neither food nor water, it could only keep rummaging through the trash. It only hoped to give its host some edible food so that she would not starve to death. Chapter 860. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com, in Baidu to find the. Thinking of that scene, even the stone-hearted Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but feel her nose turn sour. Forget it, her family system didn't have the ability. What could she do? After all, society was cruel. Perhaps her family system's family background wasn't good, which was why it had become a social loser. Of course it couldn't get good resources. Wei Wei Bai showed a rare gentleness. It's fine. No matter how poor or bitter, we'll walk together. One day, you'll shake off this poor hat and have a beautiful future. The system's face was a mess. It felt that the host had misunderstood something and hurriedly explained, actually, there's a reason why I didn't grab the sweet route. It's not because I'm poor and useless. Wei Wei Bai, I understand. Poor people also needed dignity. She understood. System, what does the host understand? Why doesn't it understand? Chi Chimu put the imperial examination case in the room. He didn't specifically guard against Wei Wei Bai. He saw her sitting at the table embroidering with a twisted expression. After returning from the temple, she had been called by Madame Bai to recite a pile of words, including how to win over a husband's heart and how female workers also needed to practice well. That was why it was rare to see her so quietly doing these things. Chi Chimu naturally understood that it was because that poisonous woman, Madame Bai, knew that his value had increased. So she planned to use Wei Wei Bai to win him over. In the future, if he really succeeded in the imperial examination, he would be a target for Madame Bai to squeeze. He thought of that old woman, and his lips curled into a cold smile. When the court examination was over, he would find an opportunity to take away Wei Wei Bai, and then kill the entire Bai family. When the time came, he would burn the corpses, and who would be able to find out that it was murder? At that time, Wei Wei Bai could only rely on him. How good would that be? Chi Chimu put down the book. He had memorized the questions for tomorrow's examination. After his rebirth, the imperial examination was much simpler for him. He looked up at her and found that she was already yawning in boredom, but she was still earnestly embroidering flowers. She wore a simple and elegant light blue dress today, her hair casually tied up with a simple and beautiful hairpin. It was simple and clean, like a pear blossom reflected in water. Chi Chimu stared at her in a daze for a good while, a quiet sweetness fermenting in his heart. When he had seen enough, he shifted his gaze away and saw the hairpin on her head. It was the key and map to his family's treasury. He didn't need the map, but the key, for the time being, he didn't need it. Under the deliberate planning in advance, his relationship with the third prince was so good that he didn't need money to surrender. When the money was needed in the future, it would be when the third prince rebelled. He calmly brewed a cup of honey flower tea and took the mung bean cake. Then, he walked to her side, put down the mung bean cake, and gave her the flower tea. Drink some, it's good for your body. And then take the embroidery bandage from her hand. There were several flower sketches on the table. It was the homework that Madame Bai had given her. Chi Chimu held a needle and thread, calmly and indifferently beginning to help her embroider. Her embroidery skills were much better than hers. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and was about to start taunting. Chi Chimu directly stuffed a piece of mung bean cake into her mouth. Be good, I'll help you embroider it soon. Wei Wei Bai immediately said vaguely, my embroidery is different from yours. My mother will know. Chi Chimu said indifferently, it's better if it's different. How could the servants outside not be clear about the matters in this room? Many of them were Madame Bai's eyes and ears. If he helped Wei Wei Bai, Madame Bai would only feel more at ease. Wei Wei Bai looked at his embroidery. It wasn't feminine at all, but his movements were very beautiful. She couldn't help but frown. How do you know everything? / Chapter 861. Chi Chimu looked up at her. His face was indifferent, but his eyes carried traces of gentleness. Maybe it's because I will meet a wife who doesn't know anything, so life made me learn everything in advance so that I can welcome her. He thought of his difficult past and didn't feel much anger. At least those experiences had allowed him to learn many things. And these things made her look at him brighter. Thinking about it this way, those lives weren't so worthless. Wei Wei Bai was stunned before she realized who the wife he was talking about was. She pursed her lips, as though she wanted to sneer. But her lips moved, and she finally turned her head away. Humph. Chi Chimu looked up at her and found that her ears were a little red. Warm light entered the window. The two of them sat together, their shadows intertwining. They appeared affectionate and gentle. Chi Chimu's fingers nimbly embroidered flowers, his mood unusually calm and beautiful. He wanted to continue like this, always. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 92. The imperial examinations were the next day, so it was rare that they didn't toss around much at night. Wei Wei Bai was halfway asleep when the system woke her up. She rubbed her eyes and carefully crawled over Chi Chimu's body, getting out of bed. Chi Chimu opened his eyes and saw her casually draped in a soft and thin robe, walking barefoot across the cold floor. Then she walked to the table and bent down to light the lamp. She turned her face to him, her eyelashes lightly entwined, seeming somewhat nervous. Her complexion was somewhat pale and delicate under the light, and her pair of black eyes were illuminated by the light with an amber hue. She opened his box for the imperial examinations and put some papers inside. Would it be like last time, giving him a cheat sheet for the imperial examinations? Chi Chimu's heart was actually somewhat stuffy. She still hadn't fallen for him. So she didn't feel the slightest bit of heartache over whether or not he could pass the imperial examinations. But to make him hate her, he couldn't do it. Wei Wei Bai breathed a sigh of relief, then turned and gently crawled over his body, smoothly returning to the warm bed. She glanced at him and found that he was still asleep. Wei Wei Bai yawned silently and continued to close her eyes, slowly falling asleep. Chi Chimu opened his eyes again. He reached out and gently pinched her face. Little rascal. However, there was a hint of gentleness in his voice, and there wasn't the slightest bit of scolding. He very carefully hugged her feet in his arms, and sure enough, they were extremely cold. He placed her feet on his warm abdomen to warm her feet. Wei Wei Bai moaned comfortably in her sleep. Chi Chimu's eyes carried traces of indulgence, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl into a smile. The next day, Wei Wei Bai woke up and found that Chi Chimu had gotten up early and left. The entrance for the imperial examinations was especially early. Before the sun rose, the students had to wait. Wei Wei Bai didn't think too much about it. The system said, "It doesn't look like a cheat sheet." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's not like I can pass the test even if I use my cheat sheet." She had already asked the system, and the same blocking method would not work. Wei Wei Bai lazily got up. "Alright, Chi Chimu has left. I should also elope." Yes, what she put in was a green hat love letter as well as a beautiful praise for her elopement partner. On the paper she had given Chi Chimu last night, she had written that she had fallen in love with a certain man at first sight, praising him for a full 3,000 words. Then at the end of the letter, she had casually scribbled a line of small words. She had decided to elope with a certain man, and then asked for a letter of divorce. Chapter 862. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "This method of obstruction is fierce enough. I gave him a green hat, and he can't take the exam if he's anxious. Isn't that vicious? System, too ruthless." When Chi Chimu saw this elopement love letter, he couldn't help but be angered to death. "Wei Wei Bai, I've already found a friend to help me stage this elopement drama. I'll be able to come back when the mission notification is complete." Once she carried out the elopement mission, she would really create an elopement plot. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to fool the main system. The system was deeply silent, expressing infinite heh towards its host's death-seeking behavior. She still wanted to come back. Wasn't she afraid of being eaten alive by Chi Chimu? Chi Chimu spread out the draft paper. Seeing that the questions hadn't changed, he very calmly began to write the answers. The examinees beside him didn't have good expressions. The imperial examination questions were very difficult. Much more difficult than the previous few times. So among the wailing examinees, Chi Chimu could be considered the calmest. He suddenly thought of the few pages of paper that Wei Wei Bai had stuffed into his hands. He swept a glance and found that they were love letters. "The man I like is incomparably handsome, has excellent family knowledge, noble character, gentle and considerate, likes me to death." Because he was in a hurry to enter the examination hall, he only hurriedly swept a glance in front of him. He was already blushing from such a straightforward confession. This was a very rare experience for Chi Chimu. Noble character, of course, he was definitely one. Incomparably handsome, he had never seen anyone better looking than him. Other than Wei Wei Bai, there was no other woman. Gentle and considerate, he poured out his heart and lungs for her, so he was definitely gentle and considerate. Liked her to death, what did it matter if she wanted to die? Anything was fine. It turned out that what she had stuffed into his hands in the middle of the night was actually a love letter. So he directly entered the examination hall with the love letter. Those who were searching his body also examined it, then looked at him with an indescribable expression. One of the soldiers who was searching his body said, "Carrying this, is it to give yourself the motivation to pass the exam?" Divorced, his wife wearing a green hat. If he didn't pass the exam, wouldn't he vomit blood and die? Chi Chimu nodded. "And, is this contraband?" Her love letter must have been his motivation. Just a glance at it made him so excited that he could write his best essay. Another first place was guaranteed. The soldier looked at him sympathetically. "It doesn't count. Take it." Then Chi Chimu excitedly entered the examination hall with the love letter. This was the first love letter that Wei Wei Bai had given him. It was the best gift he had ever received in his life. Therefore, good things had to be looked at slowly. He couldn't bear to look at them all in one go. Chi Chimu treated this love letter as his prize. Anyway, after finishing a big question, she would read 2 lines of love letters. "He's as handsome as a tree in the wind, like a pine plum tree in the snow, making people unable to forget him at first glance." She was cold to him, but she had a hot temper. He didn't expect that even his inner confession would be so intense and unrestrained. Like this, Chi Chimu's spirits were exceptionally good as he more or less finished writing all the imperial examination questions. After reading the love letter, there was only the last piece of paper and the last few lines left. He had just finished writing his question. The question was related to national affairs. He had long prepared a draft in his heart. Just as he was about to put pen to paper, he suddenly saw that the last few lines were like this. "I like him. His family is rich, raising his gentle and without the taste of poverty. His family is rich." He felt that something was wrong. He continued to read. "I like him. His name is Ping Lin Qing. I can no longer extricate myself from him." The smile hanging at the corner of Chi Chimu's mouth stiffened. So Chichimu, let's separate. Forcefully twisting a melon is not sweet. I won't twist it for you. Let's never see each other again. Chichimu, he was silent for a long time before he suddenly laughed coldly, his laughter incomparably sinister. Then he put pen to paper, the tip of the pen sharp and awe-inspiring, full of murderous intent. The answer was originally aggressive and progressive, so this writing style was simply a perfect match. Chichimu finished writing the answer. When the time came, the door opened and the examiner collected the paper. He unhurriedly got up and even calmly tidied up the box, placing the green hat love letter on his chest. When he walked out and returned home, he pushed open the door. The room was empty. He very calmly opened the box. The jewelry was missing some tacky gold and silver items, and the clothes were missing some simple and warm styles. Chichimu looked at the jewelry box. He didn't ask for it back. His intention of letting her wear his Chi family's hairpin was also thrown away. The hairpin was too simple and unadorned, not like gold. So she also didn't want it. Chichimu suddenly laughed, his laughter hoarse and ruthless. He fiercely smashed her jewelry box, his foot trampling over the hairpin, his expression terrifyingly sinister. He didn't just want to twist a melon. He wanted to stew it, boil it, and then force it to be eaten bit by bit. You'd better run further away, Wei Wei. Chapter 863. Wei Wei Bai sat in a carriage while a fine horse followed beside her. Miss Bai, the Yohu pavilion I mentioned is not far ahead. The carriage swayed. A slender white hand gently rested on the carriage's curtain, lifting it halfway. Wei Wei Bai smiled and poked her head out. I'll have to trouble Mr. Ping to send me on this trip. Ping Lin Qing was in his 30s, with a gentle and refined appearance. His eyes held a trace of reverence as he said, "No, you and I have the same hobby, and we both like the same author, so we're close friends." Wei Wei Bai nodded. "Right, I especially like Little Husband Don't Run, The Monk and the Taoist Priest Loves You by Madly Lovin' a Melon, as well as The Matter of the Young Lady and the Gardener and That Dog." Ping Linqing's gentle expression also became excited. Close friends, ah. The novel The Young Lady is simply his most classic work, written with sentimental sentiments, moving songs and tears, especially that part in bed, cough cough. Ping Lin Qing remembered that he was outside and immediately suppressed the excitement of meeting a close friend. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly agreed. "Right, you and I think alike." Then, old driver Bai and wretched old man Ping revealed the same knowing smile. Wei Wei Bai returned to the carriage once again. The system finally hugged its head. "So, this is an ancient yellow novel fan meet and greet." Wei Wei Bai spread her hands. "Otherwise, where would I go to find a man familiar with me? This kind of society had too many rules for women. She simply had no chance to meet other men. Even if she did, she wouldn't know them. Especially after marrying Chichimu, that man stared at her like he was staring at his family's treasure. He didn't let her expose herself at all. She wanted to find someone to pretend to elope with. What was more familiar than a fan meeting another fan, two wretched smiles in their eyes? Moreover, they were going to see the author together. For fans, this was simply an explosive, super good news. The system said, "Why do I feel like you just want to see the weird author who wrote about dogs, humans and beasts?" Wei Wei Bai said wretchedly, "Hee, of course not. Am I such a wretched person?" System, you are. Don't be so humble. If you keep being humble, you'll get beaten up. As soon as they arrived at the Yohu Pavilion, Wei Wei Bai and Ping Lin Qing walked side by side. A noble young master in white robes fluttered in the wind. It was a beautiful woman in a lotus-colored dress. They stood on a strangely matching piece. The scenery at the touring lake pavilion was beautiful. White snow covered the lakeside, and the lake water was clear without any ice. The branches and leaves of the lotuses were exposed on the surface of the lake, giving it a unique flavor. Ping Linqing said, "We are the first readers to find this place. When I think of seeing the author I admire, my heart beats like a deer in March." Wei Weibai said, "I'm not just a deer. I wish I could turn into the ink in that book just to touch his hand." Ping Linqing's smile changed. "I want to become his chair and let him sit on me as he writes that beautiful chapter." How could a hardcore fan lose? Wei Weibai snorted. "I want to become his eyes and be the first to see that sentimental novel. When it comes to protecting my life, I'm the first. Whoever loves the second can go." The expressions of the two readers were not right. Because they loved the same author, they felt like they were rivals. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. They glared at each other. The first signature later would be hers, his. Whoever came to snatch it would be an irreconcilable enemy. A teacup was placed heavily on the table and shattered. He stared coldly at the couple in the distance. How much did they like each other? How long had they been looking at each other? Download the at https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 864. Sir Chi. A tall man in a black suit bowed respectfully and said. Chi Chimu sat in the pavilion, pouring a new cup of water. What did you say they were talking about? The distance was too far to hear clearly. But the excited and joyful expressions on their faces could still be seen. The man was the third prince's head of secret guards and was highly skilled in martial arts. He had been borrowed by Chi Chimu to find someone. The man nodded. The distance is too far. I can only vaguely hear some. Chi Chimu indifferently lowered his eyes, no longer looking at the irksome scene not far away. He slowly turned the teacup, his voice suppressing some kind of emotion as he said somewhat hoarsely, "Say what you heard." The man nodded, his face expressionless, his voice flat and emotionless. That man said to Madam, "You are the woman I admire. When I see you, my heart is like a deer in March, beating non-stop." Chi Chimu's hand paused in the middle of turning the teacup. Then he said softly and coldly, "What did Madam say?" The man said calmly, "Madam said, I am more than a deer. I wish I could turn into the ink in that book, just to touch your hand holding the brush. Turn into ink, directly pull it under the sun for a few months and turn it into ink. Black to death." Chi Chimu's gums had a metallic taste, the blood from biting out of hatred. He didn't reveal any emotion, only saying indifferently. "Continue." The man said to Madam, "I want to turn into a chair for you to sit on and make a beautiful chapter." Then Madam replied, "I want to become your eyes and see every article you write." Because it was too far. Many of the words he heard were missed. So the man combined the scene he saw to analyze the feelings of the eloping man and woman. He concluded that the other party was speaking words of love. So the words he missed, he automatically filled in for them. He felt that he did a good job. After Chi Chimu finished listening, he didn't show any expression, but the teacup in his hand cracked a few times. It was unknown how great the enmity was for a man with ordinary strength to crack a teacup. After the man finished his report, he calmly continued to stick to the pavilion's pillar, acting like he didn't exist. Because of these words, Chi Chimu sat in a daze for a good while. He had never heard even a single good word from Bai Weiwei's mouth. Even if there was, he was the one who forced it. He had never thought that she, who only knew how to prick people, could say such beautiful words of praise. She had really met the man she liked. That was why he was so passionate. When he thought of this, those words of praise turned into the most vicious knives, turning his heart upside down. His internal organs were in severe pain. It was much more painful than when he died in his previous life. His fingers kept trembling, and he didn't dare to look up at them in the distance. He was afraid that he would not be able to suppress the murderous intent in his heart. He couldn't be impulsive. If Wei Wei really fell in love with him, killing Na Ping or whatever would push her away completely. It would be best to lock up that dog of a man and torture him until he was either dead or alive for the rest of his life. Then, he would ask Wei Wei to beg him. For that man's life, she could only follow him for the rest of her life. There was nowhere to run. This was the best method. He slowly drank a mouthful of cold water, feeling that his mouth was full of the taste of blood. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and slowly licked the corner of his lips. He had used too much force and actually bit his lips until they bled. // Chapter 865. The head of the hidden guards beside him said, "Madam left with that man." Chi Chimu still had his head lowered, playing with the teacup. If someone familiar with him in the previous life knew what his actions represented, they would know that he was making a decision. He suddenly let out a heavy sigh and stood up. "Kill him." The head of the hidden guards immediately nodded. Then he turned and left. Chi Chimu also slowly got up, his movements slow and stiff, as if he was carrying 1,000 boulder on his back. As expected, after meeting her, there was no such thing as reason. He couldn't bear the existence of that man. He would rather die than let another man exist in her heart. If one existed, he would kill one. Not a single one of them could survive. Even if he knew that she hated him to the point of wanting to kill him, it didn't matter. He felt for a handkerchief in his hand. It was that ugly peony painting. He had also taken it from her hands. How ridiculous. The things that belonged to her in his hands were all snatched by him. It didn't matter. Chi Chimu's eyes were as cold as the cold abyss. He didn't care and continued to snatch it. At worst, he would perish together with her in this life. Wei Wei Bai and Ping Linqing laughed at each other, pushing and glaring at each other. The two people's footsteps became faster and faster, hating that they couldn't shake off the other. This was the first signature of their family. Whoever got it would be the king of hardcore fans. Ping Linqing suddenly fell down with a thump. Wei Wei Bai's eyes immediately lit up, and she rushed forward with a burst of strength. Ping Linqing was startled and immediately scrambled to chase after her, but his legs were too soft. Before he could take 2 steps, he stepped on a rock. With a splash, his entire person fell into the lake. He didn't see that there was a sharp dagger behind him, about to stab into his back. But before it could be stabbed, that person had already fallen into the lake. The head of the hidden guards appeared, coldly looking into the lake. The person hadn't appeared for so long. He should have frozen to death. He calmly and quickly put away the dagger, then turned and left. Wei Wei Bai saw that there was a unique courtyard in front of her, the door half open, revealing the begonia that had lost its petals and leaves. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. She was afraid that Ping Linqing would come after her, so she pushed the door open and entered. Ping Linqing had already informed the author that he would be visiting today. Walking through the door, he found that the surroundings were terrifyingly quiet. She didn't think too much about it and didn't want to ask the system. Although she loved Huang Wen, she loved the cute little author who created Huang Wen even more. But when he was mocked and ridiculed by the system, his heart still hurt. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai lifted the hem of her lotus-colored dress and walked forward slowly. She was surrounded by romantic flowers, and the shadows of the flowers were cast on her slender back, giving her a 30% brilliance and 70% elegance. She saw that the door of the hall in front of the courtyard was open and thought that the author was inviting guests in. Therefore, he stepped in very naturally. Then, he stopped in his tracks. In front of her was a familiar figure, slender as bamboo. He raised his head and looked at the ambiguous pictures of nuns, monks, young ladies, gardeners, and so on in the middle of the hall. The faint sunlight shone on his body, bringing out a few thin strands of pale white, as if he was covered in snow. Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back, shock on her face. This was true shock. She roared at the system. Could it be that Chi Chimu is madly in love with a melon? Fuck, you can't judge a book by its cover. The system was also shocked. What misunderstanding do you have about the male lead? He is just a pervert, not a wretched person. That madly in love with a melon is still tied up and struggling in the backyard. Wei Wei Bai immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Chi Chimu isn't the author. /there. Chapter 866. You can search Transmigration System, Male God, come over to search book, www.sashu.com, in Baidu to find the. The system was speechless for a moment before saying, if that's true, you'll probably be so scared that you won't be able to capture him. Wei Wei Bai's face was stern. You're wrong. If he really is an author, I reckon that I won't be able to capture him. I can immediately throw myself at him to hug his thigh. The author lived well, so they would produce more food. That way, readers wouldn't starve to death. So the author was her spiritual parent. The systems suddenly didn't want to recognize this host. Why did other hosts read world classics and profound mathematics, physics, and chemistry? Its host was actually someone who felt a sense of superiority from reading little pornographic novels. Chi Chimu finally turned his head. He looked at her indifferently, his voice without the slightest trace of excitement. Wei Wei, you didn't tell me you were coming out. I was very worried when I didn't see you when I got home. Wei Wei Bai smiled awkwardly and said to the system, has my Imperial Examination Obstruction mission been completed yet? The system said flatly, no, Chi Chimu didn't affect the completion of the examination at all, so the main system was dissatisfied and had you act out the elopement drama. At least personally tell the male lead that you want to elope and not come to see a pornographic novel author. Wei Wei Bai, the main system wants me to die. System, yes. Admitting it so shamelessly. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath. The capture strategy had reached this point, but Chi Chimu's favorability hadn't dropped at all. Although the abnormal favorability rose very strangely, it wouldn't drop no matter what kind of blow it encountered. This could be considered one of the benefits. She remembered that her Imperial Examination Obstruction mission hadn't been completed yet, so she could only brace herself and step forward. Chi Chimu, I gave you the letter. Did you read it? Chi Chimu chuckled in a low voice. His clearly gentle expression inexplicably carried traces of morbid gloom. He muttered to himself in a low voice, I read it, but I didn't think that although my Wei Wei's writing is vulgar and not very smooth, the emotions are sincere and touching. It makes one's internal organs burn, and life is worse than death. Wei Wei Bai, is he saying that her writing is so bad that it can poison him to death? She felt that there was something wrong with the atmosphere. Wei Wei Bai's instinctive reaction to perverts made her take a few steps back. Her body was ready to run. Chi Chimu acted as if he hadn't seen her actions. His eyes were very cold, his smile unchanged. So are you here to give me the divorce papers? Wei Wei Bai braced herself and said. The system said, I feel like he's here to give you a death notice. Wei Wei Bai, Chi Chimu took 2 steps forward, only to see Wei Wei Bai take several steps back. She straightened her thin back and raised her fair and slender neck high. Her snow-white satin-like skin was tinged with a faint pink from excitement. This attitude was one of vigilance and uneasiness, but it was also so weak that it could not withstand a single blow. Chichimu slowly shook his head, his voice slow and flat. "I've come to give you something else." Then she watched helplessly as Chichimu took out a knife. The knife was so sharp that it flashed with a frightening white light. Wei Wei Bai saw it. Fuck, the favorability was only 92. Was this going to be a love but not being able to get revenge drama? She took several steps back and was just about to run when the door slammed shut. Wei Wei Bai anxiously knocked on the door. "Let me out, open the door." Chichimu was already behind her, his slender figure shrouding her, forcing her to curl up by the door with no place to escape. His expression was calm and gentle, but the knife in his hand didn't tremble in the slightest. Chichimu's eyes showed some pity. "What's wrong? Why are you so afraid of me?" Wei Wei Bai's face paled. "Chichimu, what are you doing? Don't act recklessly. Killing is against the law. Your future is very good. If you kill me, you'll have nothing." Chichimu smiled faintly. The knife in his hand was already placed across her weak and pitiful neck. Then Wei Wei Bai heard him say, "Be good, Wei Wei Bai, say you love me." Wei Wei Bai, who had a knife held against her, this unfolding was like a lunatic. Chichimu used a bit more force, and a trace of blood flowed down from her skin. His eyes narrowed slightly, the light in them warmed to the point of madness. Say that from now on, I am the only one in your heart. Say that I make you infatuated, tossing and turning." Wei Wei Bai breathed laboriously. "Chichimu, there's no meaning in forcing it." Chichimu gently shook his head, then said with a smile, "I'll force you. If you don't say it, I'll kill you." Wei Wei Bai, he's forcing a melon. The melon is so scared. / Chapter 867. Wei Wei Bai still had the elopement mission hanging over her head. She didn't dare to move, her small face deathly pale, a thin layer of sweat appearing on her forehead. The orchid fragrance on her body was even more alluring because of its owner's intense reaction. Chichimu's expression was indifferent, only his pair of black eyes were bottomless. The knife in his hand was very steady, so steady that the little prey in front of him had no chance to escape. The woman in front of him was still that little bastard who hid vicious thoughts in her heart and was cruel to the people she didn't like. He had always known that she didn't like him. But in the beginning, it was only for revenge, to obtain the pleasure of tormenting her. Later, his heart began to soften, and he couldn't help but want her to smile. When she smiled at him, his heart turned into spring snow. And now, it was an obsession that couldn't be obtained. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Wei Wei, I know you're afraid of death, so just say, love me." Even if it was self-deception, it could make him once again summon up the courage to imprison her and walk down this path together. Just once was enough. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. Saying "I love you" guaranteed that the favorability would be over 95. The system tugged at her ear and said, "Quick, say the elopement line and the small mission will be complete." Wei Wei Bai, "I want to say I love him." System, say it, we'll dance together with the dog. Wei Wei Bai, this world really made people despair for no reason. Bai Wei Wei was on the verge of collapsing. Her face was pale, and she was so scared that her lips lost color. She seemed to want to curl herself into non-existent air, tightly pursing her lips. Her eyes were somewhat red, extremely pitiful. "Chichimu, who do you think you are? My older brother died because of you, I hate you to death. You're clearly a poor boy with no power, no foundation, eating my family's food and drinking my family's water, yet you don't know how to be grateful. You only know how to threaten me and harm me. Speaking to this point, she choked with sobs, tears threatening to fall from her eyes. Stubbornly sad. This was an expression that had never appeared on her face before. Chichimu very much wanted to refute. He had lost his dignity in her home, living precariously. It wasn't good at all. Her brother also deserved to die. It was only natural for him to hate the Bai family. But looking at her red and fragile expression, he couldn't say a word. Wei Bai widened her eyes, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws like a paper tiger. You even forced me to marry you and treated me like that. I'm not the kind of person who will forgive you generously. I will take revenge for the smallest grievance. Whoever angers me, I will make them pay back 100-fold. Today, even if you kill me, I will tell you that I eloped. I want to anger you to death. As soon as the word elope appeared, the word complete immediately appeared on the small mission evaluation. When Chichimu heard her words, he was stunned for a long time. He was originally an intelligent person. He immediately caught the main point of her words. Didn't you elope with that pale-faced scholar because you liked him? Because he asked urgently, he used a bit of strength on the knife, and a drop of blood immediately fell from her dazzling white neck. This drop of blood instantly caused Chichimu's muscles to tighten. He gritted his teeth and endured the stabbing pain in his heart. He didn't move the knife away and continued, You don't like him. It's just to anger me, right? Wei Bai sneered, but her smile was somewhat stiff. She suddenly gritted her teeth and reached out with both hands to grasp the blade. She had always been delicate and afraid of pain. Chichimu didn't expect her to do this at all, // Chapter 868. He let go of the knife, but Wei Bai changed direction midway, narrowly grabbing the handle. Then she gripped the knife, the tip of the knife immediately pointing at his chest. The knife was a bit heavy, and her wrist was slender and weak, so the knife trembled slightly. Chichimu didn't retreat, standing steadily like this, not caring in the slightest about the knife in her hand. He gritted his teeth and asked word by word, Is that so? You don't like him. You just want to anger me. Wei Bai sneered with reddened eyes. I just want to anger you to death. I also deliberately wrote my admiration for another man into a love letter and stuffed it into your exam box, just to disturb your mind in the exam room and make you fail the exam. She clearly said it so sinister and vicious. But tears fell from her soft white face, silently crying and crushing his heart. He suddenly realized something and took a step forward. The knife was pressed against his chest, the tip immediately piercing into his flesh. Wei Bai jumped in fright, worry and fear flashing through her eyes. She immediately retreated nervously. But there was only so much space to retreat, and he didn't have the slightest concern for his life. Instead, as if wanting to prove something, he took a few more steps forward. The place where the knife pierced into his flesh was immediately dyed red with blood. Wei Bai was stunned. She was afraid and distressed, and wanted to let go of her hand and throw away the knife. But without waiting for her to let go, Chichimu's palm had already firmly gripped her fingers, making it impossible for her to throw away the knife. He was so close to her. The scent of orchids and the smell of blood intertwined. A suffocating smell. Just as he was about to take another step and let the knife stab into his chest and pierce through his heart, Wei Bai finally collapsed. She shouted, You're crazy, Chichimu, let go of me. Chichimu's gloomy brows relaxed. His chest was injured, but for the first time, the heartache he felt after learning of her elopement didn't hurt. A gentle smile appeared on his face. You said you love me. Wei Bai was so scared that her eyelashes trembled. Her face was pale and she looked like she was about to faint at any moment. She gasped, "Let go of me," and moved back. She was even more scared than when he pointed a knife at her. Chichimu stared blankly at her. His emotions suddenly broke through the barriers in his heart and surged forth. He even felt his nose ache a little. "Say you love me. Otherwise, I'll continue walking." This kind of threat was so ridiculous. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have been forced into a dead end. She raised her head, and her pale face was full of contempt. "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? I don't believe you dare to come here." Chichimu only looked at her deeply. Then, he slowly raised his foot and was about to continue walking. This step was the border between life and death. There was only a thin line between the tip of the knife and his heart. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't hold on any longer. Her lips trembled and she was on the verge of collapse. Her voice was hoarse as she shouted, I love you, Chichimu." When he heard these words, he was stunned for a moment before revealing a smile. This smile was different from his usual scheming and calculating sneer. It also wasn't like the smile of desire on the edge of the bed. Instead, it was pure joy. He was so happy that even his eyes, as dark as the abyss, were filled with light. So handsome that it made people's hearts pound. He let go, and the blood-stained knife in her hand immediately fell to the ground. Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand steadily. Her entire body trembled as she sat on the ground. She raised her head to look at Chichimu. Like she was scared silly. Chichimu didn't care about his injuries and slowly crouched down. Then he stretched out his hands and gently hugged Wei Wei Bai's trembling body, his fingers almost faintly curling around her. // Download. / Chapter 870. His eyes were dyed with light, bringing out a scorching temperature. It was a simple sentence, but it was so humble and real that it moved people. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, a faint blush suddenly appearing on her white face. She seemed unable to face his treatment and turned her face away. "What's the use of you saying this? You must be thinking of how to bully me in your heart. I don't believe it." Her tone, however, was not an aggressive attack. Instead, it carried traces of unconsciously shyness and unease. Like a little fluffy bird, she wished she could bury her head and hide. Seeing her like this, Chichimu's heart brightened. She wasn't without feelings for him. He pulled out a white towel and wiped her feet clean. Then, his tone was still indifferent and somewhat warm as he said, "Sweet words are indeed too insignificant. You and I still have a lifetime, and time will reveal a person's heart. How about I write you a note, and you can ask whatever you want? If I let you down in the future, let me be plagued with illness and be lonely and trapped for a lifetime." Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. As if she felt that he was a different person. Chichimu didn't feel that his feelings had changed too quickly. He had always controlled everything in his own hands, and his feelings for her came unexpectedly. His feelings for her were unexpectedly heavy. He wasn't the kind of person who was used to running away. Once he confirmed his commitment, he would firmly bite Wei Wei Bai and not let go. Then he would treat her well for the rest of his life. But Wei Wei Bai still had the temper of a child. She couldn't distinguish between good and evil, and her temperament was also wavering. She must be alarmed and suspicious because of his feelings. Chichimu also didn't expect her to give a positive response. As long as she didn't have an affair, he would slowly teach her feelings in the future. Her body was trained by him, and her feelings were also trained by him. Chichimu stroked her delicate little feet, his eyes deepening. He inwardly swallowed his saliva. Such a good time to confess, but he still suppressed his desire. Lest she feel that he wasn't serious. Suddenly, he heard a soft response. Okay. Chi-Chimu suddenly raised his head, his eyes clear and intense. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and gritted her teeth. You're the one who said it. Give me a call. In the future, I'll be sick and lonely for the rest of my life. Not only that, I'll be eaten by dogs after I die. Chi-Chimu didn't answer, instead carefully and gently putting on her shoes and socks. Then, he poured the foot-washing water away. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She thought that he was just joking. But Chi-Chimu had already returned. He deftly picked her up and walked to the desk, placing her in a chair. He personally spread out the paper and ground the ink. Tell me, what do you want me to do? I'll do it if I can. Wei Wei Bai looked at her suspiciously, but her face was getting redder and redder, and even her eyes were watery. She suppressed the tremor in her voice as she spoke. In the future, you can only have me as your wife. You are not allowed to have concubines. You are not allowed to have women outside. No, you are not allowed to even look at them. This was a request that most men couldn't fulfill. But Chi-Chimu very calmly wrote it down, and even deliberately wrote it in detail. No matter which of the 7 crimes she committed, including not having a child, it couldn't be violated. Also, you have to treat me well, very well, very well. You can't lie to me, harm me, bully me. Chi-Chimu also wrote it down. But he deliberately emphasized, the premise is that I don't hurt you. If the truth was to hurt her, then he would rather deceive her. Wei Wei Bai didn't think so much. She tilted her head and softly muttered, how can you hurt me? You can just write it. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com mobile text at https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 871. Regarding the side mission's insane punishment mechanism. Wei Wei Bai was already powerless to ridicule. The system was still munching on melon seeds. What's the matter, is it intense? Still writing 6-9. Wei Wei Bai, go read your socialist core values. Chi-Chimu did as he said. A good husband with 24 filial exemplars. That considerate appearance made even Madame Bai, who was so vicious and critical of Chi-Chimu, feel relieved. Chi-Chimu had really been bewitched by his daughter to the point of confusion. The things he did were things that men disdained to do. He was so considerate to his wife that he did everything by himself. If it weren't for his excellent knowledge, winning 2 major prizes in a row, directly entering the emperor's eyes and summoning him long before the court examination, he would be poked at in the back and scolded as a softy, losing face as a man. Therefore, Madame Bai completely gave up on monitoring Chi-Chimu. With Wei Wei Bai, Chi-Chimu would really become an official in the future. Wouldn't he be at the mercy of the Bai family? Wei Wei Bai blushed, her feet pinched by Chi-Chimu as he put on her shoes. Chi-Chimu, people are saying that you're not like a man. In fact, in modern society, Chi-Chimu's appearance was also abnormal. Clothes, shoes, and even jewelry, he had to personally ask about them and personally handle them. Wei Wei Bai would sometimes hug the system and tremble. Chi-Chimu seems to be a control freak. Love isn't like this. His control over her was just short of building a cage, breaking her limbs, and letting her turn into a doll by his side for him to dress up and manipulate. If it weren't for the bright 98 favorability points, She didn't dare to believe what his love was. System: love is something that depends on the person. Some people are healthy since childhood, have a sound family, and normal 3 views. If they love someone deeply, of course they respect and love them. Even if you want to remarry, they will let you go with a smile, bearing a lifetime of pain alone, only asking you to be happy. Wei Bai, thinking about it this way, Chi Chimu's body was once crippled, his family annihilated, and his 3 views warped. Love is indeed not quite right. The system said, the male lead is the type of person who loves his lover so much that if you don't go with me, we'll die together. In short, if I can't live, you'll have to die a horrible death as well. Wei Bai, after listening to the analysis, I feel even colder. After Chi Chimu finished dressing her up, he said with an indifferent expression, you are such a forgetful person. Recently, I have been close to the 3rd prince. Some people want to secretly harm me. I am afraid that the people around you are not reliable, so I personally watch over you. Wei Bai said hesitantly, what does this have to do with you helping me put on my shoes and clothes? Chi Chimu, because others may poison your shoes and clothes. Wei Bai, what a lofty reason. Did he think that she didn't see the perverted smile in his eyes when he helped her put on her shoes and pinched her feet? He was clearly a perverted control freak. Because Chi Chimu had been close to the 3rd prince recently, he was viewed as a thorn in the side of the crown prince and the popular 5th prince. In particular, he had schemed to have the emperor let the 3rd prince return to the center of power, and help the 3rd prince accomplish several good deeds that benefited the country and the people. This caused the 3rd prince's prestige to rise. So the enemy camp hated him to death. And his weakness was Wei Bai. Others would indeed make a move on her first. Chi Chimu was clear in his heart that in this life, although he had the upper hand and could accomplish many things ahead of time. But in this life, he had an additional weak spot. So he could only guard her even more carefully. The 3rd prince held a flower-admiring banquet and invited the family of his trusted aides to go together. Recently, the old emperor's health had deteriorated. He knew that the old emperor would be able to hold out until the beginning of spring. So he had already formulated a plan with the 3rd prince to catch the crown prince and the 5th prince in one fell swoop. Chapter 872. And the flower-admiring banquet was a cover-up. At the flower-admiring banquet, Chi Chimu jumped out of the carriage, and Wei Bai lifted the curtain. He had already reached out to hold her waist and lightly carried her out of the carriage, placing her on the ground. Wei Bai blushed, discovering that many noble ladies were looking over. She couldn't help but frown and stomp her feet. Restrain yourself outside. What are you doing? Chi Chimu smiled, casually reaching out to tuck a strand of hair from her cheek behind her ear. The people outside are indeed a bit talkative. Later, I have something to do and will leave for a while. If someone bullies you, you can directly bully them back. I'm here. He was neither too big nor too small and could be considered a golden thigh. He could support her. Wei Bai was somewhat hesitant. Won't I cause you trouble? Chi Chimu said in a low voice, if you cause me trouble, I'll happily accept it. Feel free to provoke. Wei Bai glanced at him suspiciously, then turned and proudly raised her head to walk forward. Who will cause trouble? You speak as if I will cause trouble. Her long skirt fluttered, the long ribbons of her skirt fluttering in the air. Her dainty face was taut, her pair of eyes black and bright. Chi Chimu couldn't help but reach out to grasp her ribbon, allowing it to slide along his fingers. Just like her skin was so soft and smooth. He didn't care about the astonished gazes of others and naturally stood behind Wei Bai, following her. If it weren't for his outstanding figure and cold and arrogant temperament, others would have thought that he was Wei Wei Bai's servant. They entered the banquet. As expected, Chi Chimu saw the third prince give him a look. He leaned close to Wei Wei Bai's ear. "Wait for me to come back. If you're hungry, eat something. Don't run around, or else I won't be able to find you when I come back." Saying this, he didn't care how ambiguous his posture was and stood up to leave. After he left, Wei Wei Bai also had a calm expression. She looked at the charming women in the courtyard. He felt that he should be admiring these beauties instead of flowers. There was even a stage set up, and Yaya was singing something that no one knew. Wei Wei Bai ate the pastries and ignored the others, silently calculating how much time was left. He could not allow the main quest to be completed too early. Wei Wei Bai had just finished eating a piece of white cake when a fragrant wind blew over. She looked up and saw a woman in a scarlet dress. She had a pair of bright eyes and looked very arrogant. Wei Wei Bai looked up at her but didn't get up. She didn't even ask what she was going to do. The woman looked by Wei Wei up and down, then suddenly sneered. As expected of someone from a small family. With such a petty appearance, how could he have the face to stay here? Bai Wei Wei looked at her indifferently. She continued to take a beautiful flower cake and nibble on it. She was truly tired from dealing with Chi Chimu. As for the passerby, he had no intention of dealing with him at all. She felt that apart from Chi Chimu, she was surrounded by grass. She was a Buddhist. The woman saw that she was delicate and weak and looked at her expressionlessly. She thought that Wei Wei Bai was scared stiff and couldn't speak. She became even more sarcastic. "I am the pearl of the Prime Minister's palm, Chinabeo. You still haven't paid your respects when you see me." Wei Wei Bai, this appearance, this simple and crude line that didn't go through the brain. Could the author write a little more carefully? Even a passerby didn't need to casually give someone such a stupid line without IQ. Chinabeo saw that she was still ignoring her and suddenly sneered. "Young Master Chi is such a good man, but he was forced by you to marry you. You, a withered flower plundered by bandits, what qualifications do you have to stand by his side?" Wei Wei Bai looked at her indifferently and then said indifferently, "Oh." Chinabeo stifled a bellyful of anger and was almost suffocated to death by her one word. Chinabeo was furious and immediately had her lackey maid come over. "Slap her mouth for me." Wei Wei Bai sighed. Why did this woman have to make things difficult for another woman? Why did the cannon fodder have to make things difficult for her, this pitiful attacker? She slowly got up, and the system notified that Chi Chimu had returned. Wei Wei Bai was very elegant. She reached out and adjusted the flower hairpin on her head, then opened her mouth and sneered. "What, the Prime Minister's daughter hates marriage so much, drooling over someone else's husband. Do you want to be my husband's concubine, or an outside wife?" Chinabeo choked, her face flushing red. "You," Wei Wei Bai said innocently, "what about me? Your eyes are glued to my husband. How about I give you a chance? You serve me tea right now, and I'll recognize you as my younger sister." Chinabeo had never suffered this kind of humiliation and was about to slap her face. Wei Wei Bai nimbly dodged and ruthlessly slapped back. "So what if you're the Prime Minister's daughter? Everyone has the right to punish a mistress." Chinabeo covered her face in disbelief. She was about to scream for people to chop Wei Wei Bai up. Wei Wei Bai suddenly broke into a run and rushed into Chi Chimu's arms, who had just walked over. "Husband, she bullied me. Chinabeo, I've never seen such a thick-skinned and shameless person." Slash. Chapter 873. Chi Chimu saw that Wei Wei Bai was bullying people, so shameless, so good at framing people, and even complained to him. He was relieved. He gently took out a handkerchief and wiped her hand. Does it hurt? Hitting someone would hurt too. Wei Bai lowered her eyelashes and pursed her lips, looking indescribably innocent and pitiful. It hurts. Chi Chimu hurriedly blew on her hand. I'll wash it when we get back and then apply medicine. This corny action made Wei Bai and everyone present, including the system, tremble. Wei Bai said to the system in disgust, I purely wanted to disgust Chi Chimu and make his favorability drop by 1 or 2 points. Helping a villain do evil, being arrogant and vicious in front of people, but acting obedient and seeking shortcuts behind people's backs should be the most loathsome. In the end, Chi Chimu, this pervert, had nothing to do with the people of Earth. This brain logic was simply crazy. She couldn't disgust him, but disgust herself. The system sighed faintly. This is love, Wei Bai. After Chi Chimu finished wiping her hand, his expression was gentle as he reached out to wrap his arm around her thin shoulder and walked out. When he walked to Chinabeo's side, he spoke in a neither light nor heavy tone. If you want to find a plaything for your husband to be his concubine, you should choose a good one. A woman with a dull face, a vicious heart, and looks like an old woman in her 50s. If she really lowers her head to give you tea, she won't be afraid of wronging your husband. Wei Bai suddenly fell silent. This poisonous tongue could drive a person to death. She couldn't bear to add oil to the fire. Chinabeo's complexion was deathly pale, and her body went limp. 2 female servants immediately supported her. Her lips trembled as she said, Chi Chimu, you actually dare to treat me like this. Who do you think you are? If I hadn't flattered and curried favor with the prince, how could I have allowed a poor scholar like you to come here? The 3rd prince's flower-admiring banquet wasn't something ordinary people could enter. Chi Chimu's status was the lowest among the people invited. Her voice was somewhat mournful. Her status was clearly higher than that of the couple, but her imposing manner was completely lacking. Chi Chimu glanced at her indifferently, then frowned, as though looking at her had dirtied his eyes. He couldn't be bothered to refute. He didn't even want to look at her. Not to mention talking to her. Chi Chimu lowered his head and whispered softly to Bai Weiwei, what was originally a peaceful and quiet place has been disturbed by the barking of evil dogs. We should hurry and leave BA, lest we be dirted by those filthy and ugly people who rely on their power to bully others. Wei Bai looked at Chinabeo sympathetically. The Prime Minister's pearl. After being humiliated by Chi Chimu, if word got out, it would be difficult for her to marry in the future. Wei Bai couldn't help but whisper, it's not a vicious dog. She didn't do anything. Chi Chimu's eyes were filled with indulgence, his tone soft and sticky. You're so kind, Wei. The crowd at the scene and the system. Could he be any more blatant in his blatant lies? He felt as though he was in contrast to this vicious and twisted couple. Chinabeo's arrogance and despotism had also become straightforward and natural, delicate and cute. After Chi Chimu returned home, as expected, he fetched clean water and washed her hands, 1 finger at a time, until they were clean. Wei Bai watched his serious expression, his hands meticulous and gentle. He didn't seem to feel that bending his body to do this was very lowly. Wei Bai couldn't help but say, I lied to you. No one bullied me. I bullied others. In that scene, anyone with eyes would know that she was the one who bullied Chinabeo. Chi Chimu gave a faint "and" before saying, you know how to bully others and protect yourself. I'm very happy. Fast crossover system, male god, come over here, /fast crossover system, male god, come over here, / fast crossover system, male god, come over here. Download fast crossover system, male god, come over here. Fast crossover system, male god, come over here. Chapter 874. Wei Wei Bai carefully looked up at him before whispering, "Don't you dislike my vicious and perverse personality?" He smiled. "Why would I dislike it? My personality has never been good. We should be a match made in heaven." Was this how a match made in heaven was used? Wei Wei Bai finally admitted defeat and said to the system, "I only ask that the favorability doesn't rise. If it falls, don't be delusional. System, this is love. Wei Wei Bai, if you love me again, I'll let you fuck a dog." System, when Chi Chimu wiped her hands, he suddenly softened his voice. "Wei Wei Bai, in 3 years, I will stand in a position where no one will dare to bully you. At that time, I will not let those who bullied you off so easily." Today, his status was still too low. A few words of verbal humiliation were not enough to make her situation much better. "Wei Wei Bai, I didn't get bullied." She spoke the truth. The woman who was humiliated was much more miserable than she was. She could see that China Bao liked Chi Chimu. Humiliation from the man she liked. It was more painful than being stabbed with a knife. Chi Chimu only smiled but did not continue speaking. Wait until he grasped the power of his previous life. Whoever dared to provoke him, he would first cut off their tongue, dig out their eyes, and throw them into the mass grave to feed the wild dogs. With this comparison, Chi Chimu suddenly realized that Wei Wei Bai was not the least bit vicious. In his previous life, he was a person whose personality had already been twisted, a person who walked the path of darkness. Vicious and cold, it really penetrated his bones. He couldn't help but gently place a kiss on her wrist. "You are really kind." Wei Wei Bai, before the court examination, Chi Chimu's plan with the third prince gradually grew. Although he had grasped the plan, he would still occasionally feel tired. Every time he was tired, he couldn't help but look at Wei Wei Bai. After looking, he would feel that life was so promising. Then, they were motivated to work hard for their future. Wei Wei Bai kept a close eye on the favorable impression points every day. She was afraid that she would do something out of line and cause the favorable impression points to suddenly fill up. She counted the days and wished that the next day would be the court examination. During this time, Chi Chimu became more and more tired of her. Other than the time when it was necessary to plot against others, even when he was reading and writing, he wanted her to be by his side. Slowly, the days passed peacefully and sweetly. When the snow melted, the peach, plum, and apricot blossoms began to hang on the branches. Chi Chimu could finally begin to prepare for the final exam. During this period of sweet days with Wei Wei Bai, he and the third prince had successfully tripped up the crown prince and caused Prime Minister Qin to lose most of his power. Meanwhile, the fifth prince was involved in the investigation of molesting the emperor's concubine. Let the fifth prince win the emperor's heart again. Chi Chimu also had a lot of insidious methods to pull out all of his favor. When the truth of the case was revealed, he would design another case of witchcraft to frame him for cursing the emperor to die early and destroy the fifth prince's power. In any case, the emperor's body was truly rotten. After he finished the court examination, the emperor died in less than half a month. After the emperor died, the fifth prince would definitely lose any possibility of succeeding the throne. And the third prince was the biggest winner. In this life, Chi Chimu didn't even use his family's wealth and left much more smoothly than in his previous life. On the morning of the court examination, Wei Wei Bai was shaken awake in a daze. Chi Chimu fed her some water and helped her put on her clothes and shoes. Carrying the things for the imperial examination, he took Wei Wei Bai out the door. Tea there. Chapter 875. The sky was still dark. Bai Wei Wei didn't wake up until she got into the carriage. What's the matter? Where are we going? Chichimu took out the millet porridge that had been warm since yesterday and filled a bowl for Wei Wei Bai to eat. Wei Wei Bai drank in a daze. She had stuffed a note into the wooden box she gave him for the exam last night. She thought that he would carry the box to the exam early. But in the end, he actually carried her here. Chichimu slowly drank the porridge. He said, "Inviting you to see the beautiful scenery." Wei Wei Bai yawned and muttered in dissatisfaction, "What beautiful scenery in the dark awe." Chichimu smiled but didn't speak. The carriage traveled for a while before stopping. Chichimu lifted the curtain and let Wei Wei Bai come over. "Look, Wei Wei, this is my path to the light." Wei Wei Bai looked out with a face full of question marks. She saw a 10-li-long street, majestic and full of lanterns. There were people everywhere, the lanterns in their hands illuminating the dark sky. Chichimu said, 10 years of cold study is just for today, and I will step on this group of scholars and ascend to the highest position. Wei Wei Bai said, "What if you're not careful and fail the role?" Chichimu, "If I fail the role, I will be very sad and will lean on you to cry." Wei Wei Bai thought of that scene and her face paled. She immediately waved her hand to drive him away. "Roll away, quickly go get your first place." Chichimu saw her cute little appearance and couldn't help but plant a kiss on her soft and tofu cheeks. In public, Wei Wei Bai was so angry that her face turned red. "What if someone sees, Chichimu?" Chichimu smiled as he got off the carriage. Wearing a white robe and a blue robe, he casually picked up the lantern on the side of the carriage and walked into the crowd. He looked back at her several times before unhesitatingly throwing himself into the sea of people for the last time. Wei Wei Bai suddenly realized why he had brought her here. The so-called beautiful scenery. She was just looking at Chichimu. He wanted her to stand here and watch him take his first steps to power. Wei Wei Bai lifted the curtain. Her face was as white as snow. After a long time, she slowly lowered the curtain. By stopping him from taking the imperial examinations this time, does that mean that the side quest has been completed? She remembered that in the plot, after Chichimu became the top scorer, he basically met gods, killed gods, met devils, killed devils. The people of the Bai clan could only be abused by him. So, there shouldn't be any side quests after this. The system coughed lightly. Now that you've completed the small mission of stopping the imperial examinations, there's still one more small mission to complete. Wei Wei Bai looked haggard. Another small task. The system said, give him a cup of poisonous tea and send him to heaven. Wei Wei Bai, she suddenly wanted to lie down. Actually, it wasn't that unbearable to spend a night with a dog. Right? The side mission of this plane would definitely kill her without a doubt. Wei Wei Bai thought of the note she had stuffed in and finally couldn't help but say, if he saw the note and his favorability increased to 100, I would have played for nothing. After all, when she stuffed the note, she had considered that after passing the obstacle of the imperial examinations, the side quest should be completed directly. So, the things written on the note, in addition to thoroughly disturbing Chichimu's mind, could also make him unable to restrain his joy and increase his favorability towards her. But she had overlooked that damned poisonous tea plot. The system also glanced at the note. It really admired Wei Wei Bai for being able to think of such a bizarre reason to stop it. It thought that the green hat love letter was already powerful enough. Chapter 876. As a result, the obstruction node in the palace examination went up another level. Wei Wei Bai sat in the carriage, her hand supporting her forehead, incomparably sleepy. But when it was about time to reach home, the carriage didn't stop. Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes, clear and sharp. She said, Tongzi, what's the situation outside? The system was as calm as the wind. We were kidnapped. Wei Bai, who kidnapped you? System, passerby A, the fifth prince and cannon fodder Chinabeo. Chi Chimu helping the third prince led to the fifth prince's mad counterattack. Wei Bai was the first to be brought out for revenge. Wei Bai sighed. Being loved is also a heavy burden. Chi Chimu's love for me is really too famous. People don't retaliate against him and just catch me to torture. If it weren't for the fact that favorability didn't lie, she could come up with conspiracy theories. Chi Chimu, this scheming boy, wanted to set up a target and dote on her, but in fact, it was just to use her as a shield. She was very sure that Chi Chimu, that guy, would do it. Kidnapping wasn't a big deal. Bai Weiwei closed her eyes again and continued to take a nap. She woke up early and didn't have the energy. Chi Chimu didn't look at the note Wei Bai gave him this time. She wouldn't harm him. He saw through her very clearly. She was moved by him. He was also very clear about it. The soldier searching him strangely glanced at the note and found no place to hide the note, so he put it back. Chi Chimu smiled. Sure enough, that note wasn't a cheat note. Although he didn't know what she wrote, the soldier didn't show any particularly shocked expression. Therefore, the words on the note shouldn't be anything shocking. He entered the examination hall. The environment of the palace examination was particularly good. This examination would last for a full day until sunset. Although the emperor's health wasn't good, he would still find time to come over. He knew these steps by heart. He opened the test paper. Sure enough, it was the same test paper as in his previous life. Chi Chimu's expression was indifferent as he laid out the paper and ground it, his movements neither fast nor slow. Because the answer to the question had been prepared for a year, he picked up the pen and wrote it down without even using draft paper. Other people had to write a draft and then copy it, but he had saved a lot of time. Therefore, he finished the questions that were supposed to last the entire day before noon. He was afraid that he would stand out too much. He pretended to be incomplete. As for Wei Bai's note, it was still under the paperweight. He had not read it yet. After he finished writing the question, he finally took the paper and unfolded it to read the words on it. It was a simple line of words. There were no fancy adjectives. I am pregnant, Chi Chimu. Chi Chimu was stunned. A wave of ecstasy suddenly swept through his heart. His breathing was labored and he was at a loss. His body felt as heavy as lead. It turned out that when one was extremely happy, one's body would not relax at all. She was pregnant. They had a child. Chi Chimu couldn't help but giggle foolishly. His fingers tightly pinched that line of characters, constantly rubbing against it. Really good. Really too good. He had never felt that life was so good. His eyes were even moist with tears. He lowered his head and wiped them away. For a person who had been lonely for 2 lifetimes, at this moment, life had almost reached perfection. His ecstasy continued to surge, but he suddenly realized that something was wrong. The paper was somewhat thick. He tried to rub it with his fingers and found that it was 2 pieces of paper that were tightly posted. He carefully tore it open and found that on the next page, there was a paragraph written on it. Full text //. Download. The Chapter 877. These words extinguished all the joy in his heart. I lied to you. The doctor told me that my body has lost the ability to be a mother. Chi Chimu almost didn't dare to look down. She knew. She must also know that she couldn't have children because he had pushed her into the ice water. Would she blame him? I don't blame you, but I want to cling to you for a lifetime. When these words entered his eyes, Chichimu choked up for a moment. She didn't blame him. She suddenly felt that the child wasn't important. Her clinging to him was the most important. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 99. Wei Bai heard the favorability prompt and knew that her slip of paper should have been discovered by Chichimu. She wasn't tied up. The people tied up were all members of the Bai family. The fifth prince's expression was sinister. He hadn't had a good time recently, so his temper was particularly bad. Wei Bai was terrified. Who are you? Why did you tie us up? The fifth prince sneered. I just gave you the 5-step powder. After today, you will die tomorrow without the antidote. The people in your family also drank the same medicine. Wei Bai's face was deathly pale. She looked at him in bewilderment. What enmity does our Bai family have with you that you want to retaliate against us like this? The fifth prince threw the teacup on the table, his expression sinister. Retaliating against you is not enough. I want you to go back and poison Chichimu. If he dies, you live. If he lives, your entire family will die. The bound Madame Bai's expression immediately changed. Son-ah, you have to do it. Otherwise, the Bai family will be ruined, and mother will also die. The other members of the Bai family immediately nodded. Right, kill Chichimu and come save us. In any case, you didn't like Chichimu at first. Kill him and find a better man for you. Wei Bai furrowed her brows. The flower pattern Chichimu had drawn on her forehead was particularly beautiful and exquisite, setting her off to be even more charming and moving. The fifth prince glanced at her and suddenly raised an eyebrow. You killing Chichimu will count as your merit. When I inherit the throne in the future, I will bestow you a consort and let your family rise to the heavens with chickens and dogs. Chichimu was the third prince's most formidable military advisor behind the scenes. Killing Chichimu was not only revenge, but also severing the third prince's limbs. Without Chichimu's brain, just by relying on the third prince's scheming, he definitely wouldn't be able to win against him. Chichimu's methods were ruthless, his mind clear, and he was an expert at playing with power. Clearly, he had never been an official before. However, he was like a 1,000-year-old fox who had been immersed in the officialdom for decades. People feared him and wanted to get rid of him. Chinabeo, who had been standing proudly at the side and looking at Wei Bai with disdain, suddenly spoke. Your Highness, you said that you wanted me to personally disfigure her. The fifth prince flirtatiously lifted Chinabeo's chin with his fan and looked at the makeup on her face. Then, he calmly withdrew his fan. What are you in such a hurry for? Others look better than you. Are you jealous? Wei Bai's appearance was indeed top-notch. Even the fifth prince, a man who soaked in women's flowers, was inevitably moved. Wei Bai finally reacted. Her face was deathly pale as she stood up and silently retreated a few steps. Her entire person was especially pitiful and vigilant. She was like a small animal that had fallen into a trap and didn't know how to break free of this predicament. The fifth prince knew at a glance that Wei Bai was a timid and afraid person. Moreover, he had also looked at the past data. This was a scheming, foolish, and sweet woman who was also proud of herself. Her brain was stupid and useless, ////////. Chapter 878. This kind of woman was definitely greedy for life and afraid of death. At first, he also doubted why Chichimu was moved by this kind of woman. But when he entered and saw her for the first time, he easily knew the reason. Her appearance moved people's hearts. Her pair of clear, watery eyes were enough to move a man's heart. The fifth prince turned the fan in his hand and couldn't help but soften his voice. It's just a cup of poison tea. Coax Chichimu to drink it and make me happy. I'll do my best to satisfy whatever you want. At first, he didn't intend to be so gentle. He even prepared a terrifying punishment, intending to force her to agree. But seeing her like this, he couldn't help but be gentle. Wei Bai nervously clutched at her sleeves. I won't kill the fifth prince. That poison is very painful. Your intestines will be twisted into a ball. It's so painful that you can neither beg for life nor die. You wish you had never been born. Madame Bai immediately howled miserably. Wei, listen to mother. Mother knows you don't like Chichimu. Just coax him to drink a cup of tea and save us ba. Wei Bai looked up, tears in her eyes. She looked at them with extreme fear. Bean-sized tears fell, crying so hard that it made one's heart ache. The fifth prince opened his folding fan. For the first time, he felt that bullying people was not refreshing at all. She was such a delicate and soft girl. Could she really poison Chichimu, that 1,000-year-old fox, to death? Just as the fifth prince was hesitating whether to let go of Wei Bai, Wei Bai's inaudible reply sounded. I'll do it. Let my mother go ba. These words were really too soft. If not for the fifth prince's good hearing, he would have missed it. She wouldn't lie to him, right? The fifth prince looked up at her and found that she was staring, her tears still falling. He quickly frowned. No matter how he looked at her tears, there was something wrong with her body. The fifth prince immediately waved his fan. All right, quickly go ba. Chinabeo watched as Wei Bai walked out unscathed and said to the fifth prince, didn't you promise me to disfigure her? That's why I begged my father to support you. The fifth prince was already very irritated, but after hearing her words, he became even more irritated. She's so beautiful, who would be willing to part with her? Chinabeo. Why are there so many shameless people in this world? Only half of the court examination had passed. A young eunuch calmly threw a slip of paper onto Chichimu's table. Chichimu watched him warily, not touching the slip of paper. The little eunuch made a hand gesture, which was Wei Bai's name. Chichimu's expression changed. He immediately picked up the note and found that Wei Bai had been tied up. He immediately got up and ignored the exam. In a few minutes, the emperor would be here. This was a good opportunity for him to stand out. However, this was nothing compared to a single strand of Wei Bai's hair. His face was dark as he walked out. When the guards outside saw that he was about to charge out, they immediately drew their swords and pointed them at him. During this period of time, Chichimu had been bitterly practicing martial arts. With a flip of his hand, he snatched away a knife, not caring that he would be injured as he forced his way out. He snatched a horse and madly galloped out. Wei Bai had been tied up, and he used all his strength to search for her. He soon learned that Wei Bai had been kidnapped by the fifth prince. But the fifth prince had hidden himself deeply, and he couldn't find him for the time being. Chichimu was burning with impatience. When he searched late into the night, the third prince's people also met up with him. He still couldn't find her. He knew that the fifth prince had bound Wei Bai for a reason. He could only calm down and return home to wait for the fifth prince's request. But as soon as he stepped into the room, he found that the candles were brightly lit. His footsteps paused, and in the next second, he immediately rushed in. He saw Wei Bai sitting in front of the dressing table, staring blankly at the mirror. She turned back and suddenly revealed a gentle smile to Chichimu. Chichimu, I cried and ruined my makeup. Help me redo it. Chichimu rushed over and pulled her into his arms, his voice choked with sobs. It's good that you're fine. It's good that you're fine. His entire body trembled uncontrollably. Only when he saw her did he realize how much he feared losing her. Full text // Download. / Chapter 879. Wei Wei Bai hesitated before placing her hand on his back. Then she slowly leaned over and hugged him. She seemed to want to do her best to give him a bit of warmth so that he wouldn't tremble so badly. Her tone was stifled. I'm fine, Chi Chimu. I'm not dead yet. Chi Chimu had experienced all kinds of desperate things, and he could face them calmly. There weren't many times when he felt fear. Most of the time, it was anger and hatred. But when he saw her return tonight, all that was left was the lingering fear and the trembling of surviving a calamity. When she was kidnapped, he actually felt that everything he had done since his rebirth was meaningless. This feeling was so painful that he was at a loss. Chi Chimu hugged her even more tightly. He experienced the reassuring feeling of her warm body. Like a child, he could only slowly quell the feeling of helplessness after losing her in her arms. Wei Wei Bai didn't mind his tears wiping her dress. She only hung her head weakly, her long black hair scattered messily across her chest. Her small face was pale and blue. She didn't know what kind of poison that 5-step powder was. It wasn't dawn yet. It began to wrench in pain inside her body. Wei Wei Bai silently endured, swallowing back the blood in her throat. Chi Chimu seemed to feel her unnatural trembling and suddenly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot and tear-stained. He spoke coldly. Did he treat you rudely? He was the 5th prince. Wei Wei Bai shook her head and said softly, no. Chi Chimu's eyes recovered their clarity and sharpness. He seemed to be afraid that the murderous intent in his eyes would frighten her. He immediately lowered his eyes, but his tone softened. It's good that you didn't. I'll have the doctor come over tomorrow to examine your body. He wasn't reassured that she had been kidnapped and released. He was afraid that the 5th prince's people had done something to her body. Wei Wei Bai frowned as she looked at the mirror. Her long hair was messy and her makeup was ruined. She didn't look good at all. Chi Chimu, draw me another flower. Chi Chimu felt that Wei Wei Bai's state wasn't right. She was still thinking about her makeup at this time. But when he thought about how childish she had always been, he went along with her. He picked up the rouge powder box and fetched some water to help her wash her face. Then, he reapplied makeup on her delicate, snow-white face. She liked the bright makeup. But he knew that under her gorgeous makeup, her plain and elegant face was even more lovable. He was afraid that she would attract more rotten peach blossoms when she went out. He had always been happy to indulge her with more makeup. But today, Wei Wei Bai was holding his hand. Her eyes were bright and there was a faint smile on her face. Why don't you give me some light and elegant makeup? Chi Chimu's hand paused, seemingly somewhat puzzled. Wei Wei Bai was a little embarrassed and said, I know you like my clean and elegant appearance. Chi Chimu's old face reddened. She actually knew that he liked her bare appearance. He felt a little sweet in his heart, and his movements became much gentler. He lightly brushed a thin layer of powder on her face, and then pressed the powder with his fingertips. He gently touched her cheek. A faint touch of red. Her bloodless face suddenly brightened up. Her complexion wasn't good. Chi Chimu silently thought that he should have a doctor come over as soon as possible to examine her body. He was afraid that in addition to being unable to bear children, she would also fall ill. Wei Wei Bai saw that she had become neat and beautiful and smiled in satisfaction. She got up and said to Chi Chimu, Am I the most beautiful woman you've ever seen? / The Chapter 880. Chi Chimu's eyes were infatuated as he nodded. Yes. No matter how many beautiful women he met in the future. Even if she gradually grew old and wrinkles climbed to her eyebrows and eyes, she would still be the most beautiful woman in his eyes. This had nothing to do with appearances. It was just his heart. Wei Wei Bai covered her smile. You really are shameless. I say I'm the most beautiful and you actually agree. Chi Chimu saw her smile and his heart couldn't help but relax. He was afraid that she had been kidnapped and would feel depressed when she returned. Wei Wei Bai casually walked to the table and poured a cup of tea. The tea that had been spiked had long since turned cold. But she carelessly handed the tea to Chi Chimu with an innocent smile. Husband, I see that you are tired, so I'll reward you with this tea. Her attitude was so natural, as if she was joking with him. Chi Chimu took the tea and brought it to his nose when he suddenly paused. He looked up at her, a trace of grief flashing through his eyes. The room was filled with the fragrance of orchids. There was also a faint, almost unpleasant aroma in her tea that he would never forget even if he were to die. It made him return to his previous life. At that time, she had lowered her head and timidly handed over the tea. He thought he had already won and didn't think much about it, but he fell for her just like that. In this life, he used up all his thoughts and schemes to scheme against everyone. Only towards her, he lost his initial desire for revenge. Instead, he indulged her more and more. In exchange, it was still the same cup of poison tea. Chi Chimu's fingers trembled. His voice was somewhat hoarse and trembling. Wei Wei, do you want me to drink it? Wei Wei Bai stood by the table, staring at him blankly, the smile at the corner of her mouth stiff. The flower between her brows was so delicate. He had personally drawn it. Chi Chimu said heavily, word by word, do you want me to drink it? Wei Wei Bai's body swayed, her fingers propping up the table. The naive arrogance in her expression finally disappeared. His heart was filled with fear. She clutched her sleeves tightly. She was so nervous that she looked at him helplessly. He couldn't say a single word. It was as if she was the one who was going to drink the poison. Not like him. She even gave him a pleading look. She seemed to be asking him not to force her. This expression made Chi Chimu's heart ache. His Wei Wei also knew how to use him to seduce a man to die for her. Chi Chimu sneered, his laughter low and somewhat mournful. She was really born to be his nemesis. In this life, no one could stop him from climbing up. Only she, this heartless little bastard, with a simple helpless expression, completely defeated him. As Chi Chimu smiled, his expression turned indifferent, seemingly powerless. He looked at her tiredly and suddenly did not want to force her. You're the one who brought it to me, so of course I have to drink it. How can I waste your good intentions? Chi Chimu raised the teacup to his mouth, his lips curling into a light smile. Sure enough, he shouldn't have spoiled her. Wei Wei Bai, who couldn't be raised properly, had to be personally tied up and watched over by him. The tea that Chi Chimu brought to his mouth had not yet touched his lips. He wanted to collapse. He wasn't a fool. If he died, she would be able to freely live her good life. No, she was so stupid and brainless. Without his protection, it was impossible for her to live well. Sure enough, it was better for him to live. Otherwise, who would still love this vicious, selfish, and useless little heartless person who would only drag others down? To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 881. Chi Chimu thought of this and was just about to throw away the teacup. A fair and slender hand suddenly swung over. The teacup in his hand was thrown out. Chi Chimu's hand was empty, but he still maintained the action of holding the teacup. Her movements were too fast, so Chi Chimu's brain couldn't react. He could only stare foolishly at her. Wei Wei Bai waited for the system to announce the completion of the side mission before immediately knocking away the teacup in Chi Chimu's hand. After all, if she killed the target, her main mission had to be completed as well. When she handed Chi Chimu the poison tea, she had already calculated that no matter how deranged the main system was, it wouldn't use the main mission as a joke. Sure enough, when she handed over the tea, the countdown to the completion of the side mission began. As long as Chi Chimu held the teacup for more than 2 minutes, regardless of whether he drank it or not, it would count as completing the mission. And she deliberately used the poison that had killed Chi Chimu in her previous life. Because Chi Chimu had died once, he must have studied this kind of poison and had a particularly deep impression of it. As long as she gave him this cup of poison tea, he would be able to smell that something was wrong. Then he definitely wouldn't drink it and would even hold the teacup to stall for time, interrogating her as to why she poisoned him. 2 minutes passed with this question. Then she hugged his thigh and begged for forgiveness, relying on her 99 love value. Chi Chimu's attitude was, of course, what else could he do? Of course it was to forgive her. But she didn't think that Chi Chimu's brain was full of holes. He clearly knew that the tea was poisoned. He even wanted to put it into his mouth. Fortunately, he also hesitated for a while, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to hold out for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes passed, she knocked away the teacup in his hand and let out a sigh of relief. Chi Chimu stared blankly at her for a moment before returning to his senses to look at the shattered teacup on the ground. Wei Wei Bai clenched her fists, her hands red from hitting the teacup too hard. Her face was deathly pale, and even the light red rouge couldn't hide her unsightly complexion. As if she had just woken up from a dream, she moved her lips and cried in fear, "Don't drink it. I poisoned it. Don't drink it." Chi Chimu staggered a few steps, looking at her in disbelief. He had originally thought that he had reached the deepest level of hell and would never be able to climb out. Her words pulled him back to the human world, where there was light everywhere. Chi Chimu saw the fear in her eyes and knew that she had been frightened. He didn't care that she wanted to poison him. He only knew that she was scared. He couldn't bear to see her so scared. He hurriedly stepped forward, but Wei Wei Bai hurriedly took a few steps back. Her tears fell. "I didn't do it on purpose. They captured my mother and a lot of people to threaten me. They even threatened me." Chi Chimu's long arm reached out, directly pulling her into his embrace. He hugged her tightly, and at the same time, he held the hand that she used to push the teacup away. Looking at it, her soft and boneless palm, as expected, had turned red. She was in too much of a hurry. She was indeed the one who was hurt when she clashed head-on with the teacup. The darkness and distortion in Chi Chimu's eyes were gone, leaving only tender pity. "Does it hurt?" Wei Wei Bai's face was deathly pale as she looked at him in confusion, seemingly unable to understand what he was doing. Chi Chimu patiently asked again, "Does it hurt?" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, the rims of her eyes red. She finally nodded, aggrieved. "It hurts, Chi Chimu, I'm in so much pain." She really was in pain. The system wanted to relieve the pain, but she refused. Because this plane had used up too much life points, // The Chapter 882. She couldn't bear to spend any more. She just had to endure the pain. What kind of pain hadn't she endured before? So right now, she felt as if her internal organs were overturning rivers and seas. Chi Chimu said with heartache, "I'll go find some medicine for you to apply. It'll be fine soon." Wei Wei Bai laid in his arms, looking at the sun peeking through the window. Her mind blurred, knowing that this body of hers was done for. There was still one last point of favorability. She suddenly reached out and grabbed his clothes, her voice weak, her breath gradually drifting away. Chichimu, will you still like another woman? Chichimu frowned, suddenly feeling that something was wrong. Why was her body so cold? No, just you will torment me to death. I don't have time to like others. He spoke the truth, but his hand couldn't help stroking her forehead. Did she catch a cold? Wei Wei Bai was powerless to stop him, only smiling weakly. But I can't torment you. How about you like me in the next life? Chichimu's hand touched her face. So cold that it made his hand tremble. His breathing paused, finally realizing what was wrong with her. Large beads of sweat broke out on Wei Wei Bai's forehead. She seemed to want to laugh, but a mouthful of blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. She was in so much pain that her whole body trembled, her bright eyes covered with a layer of gray gauze. I know I'm bad and selfish. They gave me poison and said that if you didn't die, I would die. I'm afraid of death, I'm afraid of death. Chichimu's face was completely white. He couldn't care about anything else, immediately carrying her and rushing out. Wei Wei, I'll call an imperial physician for you. It won't hurt anymore. His voice trembled, his legs almost weak as he ran out. Wei Wei Bai leaned into his arms, absent-mindedly saying, I poisoned you. Do you hate me to death? Don't hate, I don't hate. Chichimu repeatedly roared. He had long been unable to hate her. He didn't have enough time to love her, so how could he hate her? Bai Wei Wei revealed a smile, but she pressed it back down in grievance. Chichimu, I'm dying of pain. Chichimu forced a smile and comforted her. It'll be fine after seeing a doctor. Don't be afraid. Is that so? Her voice weakened. Chichimu's breathing quickened, almost crying out loud. Yes, when have I ever lied to you? Wei Wei Bai's body became lighter. She didn't even feel any pain. She couldn't help but smile. You lied to me so many times. Chichimu immediately said, I won't lie to you even once in the future. Wei Wei Bai said coquettishly, really? Chichimu, really, I won't lie to you even if I deceive the heavens and deceive the earth. Wei Wei Bai said, then you should live well. I don't want you to be lonely and sick all your life. I want you to live happily. Chichimu's eyes were red as he rushed forward. He couldn't think, only knowing how to respond. All right, I'll promise you anything. Wei Wei Bai endured the pain while leaning against his chest in satisfaction. She dizzily uttered her last words. Chichimu, love me a little more, okay? Okay. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 100. The host's body has suffered great destruction and is in danger of death. Immediately leave this plane. Countdown to leaving this plane, 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Successful departure. Chichimu's footsteps suddenly stopped. He stood on the bustling street with Wei Wei Bai in his arms, momentarily forgetting the direction of the imperial palace. He wanted to take Wei Wei to the third prince's place to borrow an imperial physician. He heard that the imperial physician was very powerful. As long as the person had a single breath, he could save them. But he had actually forgotten which direction he was going to go. Wei Wei, do you remember the way? Chichimu held the ice-cold Wei Wei Bai and asked foolishly. I forgot. She was clearly in great pain, but he had forgotten where to find a physician for her. Wasn't he really useless? // to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the you're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.